Step back with us tonight to Viking Age Scandinavia, beneath the northern winter sky. In an Icelandic hall during the long winter nights of the Viking Age, a poet recites the prophecy of Osiris, who has seen the gods' final battle. Her vision begins with snow, broken bonds, and a darkened sun, but it ends with green land rising quietly from the sea. At a dark Icelandic hall around the year 1270, you sit beside a peat fire, while winter presses quietly against the turf walls. The fire breathes beneath its grey ash, giving a soft red light to the benches, hanging cloaks, and low table near the doorway. Cold salt air moves inward from the shore, carrying the faint smell of kelp and distant water. Around you, sheepskins lie folded over wooden seats, warm where other bodies rested earlier in the evening. Smoke gathers beneath the rafters and drifts slowly towards a narrow opening in the roof. On the table, a quill lies beside a small ink horn, while scraped vellum waits beneath the glow. Beyond the doorway, pale northern light rests upon a quiet sea, though darkness has already begun to gather along the hills. In this hall, you hear a low voice reciting words that seem older than the room itself, speaking of the first silence before the worlds were ordered. The voice belongs to a tradition preserved in Iceland long after the Viking Age had passed into memory. The Viking Age is conventionally dated from approximately 800 to 1050, although Norse mythic traditions continue to be copied, reshaped, and remembered into the 12th century. You are listening, in imagination, to the Völuspá, the prophecy of the seeress, also called the prophecy of the Völva. Its speaker is Osiris, who addresses Odin, the god who asks her to recall the earliest events and describe what waits in the future. Her knowledge reaches backward into creation and forward towards the destruction and renewal of the world. The peat fire settles with a small sigh, and one glowing fragment sinks inward among the embers. Smoke softens the edges of the hall, leaving the nearest faces clear, while everything beyond them becomes a shadowed suggestion. Your hand rests against coarse wool, whose fibers catch gently against your skin. Somewhere outside, a rope taps against a post in the wind. The sound is slow and irregular. Water moves beyond the doorway, black beneath the sky, touching the stones with a patient hush. The smell of salt mingles with smoke, ink, damp wood, and the faint animal warmth held inside the sheepskins. The darkness does not feel empty. It seems to surround the hall like a deep cloak. The Völuspá was preserved in the Poetic Edda manuscript known as the Codex Regius, written in Iceland in the 13th century. You can imagine the manuscript resting on the table before you, its pages made from pale, scraped vellum, its letters darkened by ink that has softened slightly with age. The poem is written largely in Fornyrðislag, an Old Norse alliterative meter shaped by stress, rhythm, and the meeting of repeated initial sounds. You hear its lines as measured phrases, each one carrying weight without haste. In modern scholarly editions, the best-known form contains 66 stanzas, though manuscript arrangements vary. The Codex Regius version is traditionally counted as 63 stanzas. These numbers remain distinct, yet the voice moving through them remains recognizable, patient, grave, and immense. The fire gives off steady warmth against your knees, while the stones near the doorway retain the cold of the shore. Faint draught passes across your face and lifts a loose strand of wool from the blanket beside you. The hall smells of peat, wet leather, and old smoke. In the corner, a wooden vessel holds water drawn earlier from a spring. Its surface barely trembles when the wind moves beneath the door. Outside, the sea has become a darker band beneath the northern sky. No waves are visible from where you sit, but their sound arrives through the walls. The reciter's voice rises and falls with the old meter. Each alliterative phrase seems to touch the next, like stones placed carefully across a stream. You are standing now within the poem's first great silence, before the familiar world has acquired its shape. There is no settled earth beneath your feet, no roof above your head, and no shore dividing water from land. You sense only the meeting of opposites, fire and frost, brightness and shadow, movement and stillness. The ordering of the cosmos has not yet begun. The gods have not yet raised their halls, the giants have not yet claimed their ancient places, and human beings have not yet opened their eyes beneath the branches of the world tree. The seeress remembers this beginning because Odin has asked her to remember. She does not offer a dream without structure. She unfolds a sequence whose shape is already known. The imagined air is vast and clean, without the smell of smoke or wool. Frost glitters beneath a distant, colorless brightness, while warmth moves far away like a hidden pulse. You feel no ground, yet you are not falling. There is a stillness beneath every future sound, holding the quiet before ice cracks, waves gather, and wind finds the mountain passes. The absence of familiar objects becomes its own kind of shelter. No walls surround you, but nothing presses close. The world is not yet crowded with names. It waits, cold and open, beneath the unseen rhythm of events. From this meeting of fire and frost, the earliest forms emerge, and the poem begins to give the emptiness a history. You move backwards through an ordered memory in which the gods, giants, humans, sea, sky, and world tree each receive their place. The giants belong to older powers of wildness and distance, while the gods establish halls, boundaries, laws, and relationships among the worlds. Human beings occupy a vulnerable middle ground, sheltered by arrangements made by powers greater than themselves. Beneath everything stands Yggdrasil, the world tree, whose branches extend through the heavens and whose roots reach into deep and difficult regions. The cosmos is not a flat landscape. It is a living structure, held together by roots, branches, roads, wells, and the movement of fate. You can almost feel bark beneath your palm as the imagined tree rises beside you, immense and silent. Its trunk is dark with moisture, ridged and ancient, while small leaves tremble far above in a wind you cannot quite hear. Beneath one root, water gathers in shadow. Beneath another, the earth smells of moss and rain. The air is cooler near the roots and lighter beneath the branches. Birds move through the high leaves, though their wings are lost among the distances. Around the tree, the worlds remain separate but connected. The sea breathes beyond one horizon. A pale sky stretches beyond another. The quiet of the tree makes every later disturbance seem far away. As the gods establish their order, you enter a world that is already fragile because it depends upon continued labor. The divine halls must be maintained, boundaries guarded, agreements remembered, and dangerous beings restrained. Odin stands among the gods as a seeker of knowledge, a ruler who understands that knowledge does not always bring comfort. Thor carries the strength required to defend the ordered worlds, while other gods sustain different parts of the divine community. The giants remain beyond the borders, not merely as enemies, but as ancient counterparts whose presence belongs to the same cosmic design. Even before Ragnarök, the balance contains tension. The world is stable because opposing forces have not yet broken their limits. A cool wind moves through the doorway near the shore, and the fire answers by leaning briefly towards the wall. You draw the sheepskin closer around your shoulders. Its surface is soft in some places and rough in others, carrying the faint scent of lanolin and winter air. A thread of smoke passes across the light and disappears above you. The reciter pauses between groups of lines, allowing the hall to gather itself again. Outside, the sea is almost motionless. Pale northern light lies over it like a thin sheet of silver. The quiet feels deliberate, as though the land itself is holding still while the old account continues. The seeress does not describe a random disaster arriving without warning from an empty sky. She describes a sequence, and each part of that sequence grows from what came before. The gods act within a world governed by memory, oath, consequence, and fate. Their knowledge of the future does not release them from responsibility. Instead, it gives their actions a particular dignity. Odin learns that destruction is coming, yet he continues to seek wisdom and prepare the gods. Thor knows that the powers of chaos will rise, yet he remains the defender of the human and divine worlds. The central tension is therefore not between ignorance and knowledge. It is between foreknowledge and action. The hall grows warmer around the fire, though the stones beneath the benches remain cold. A log collapses inward, sending a brief fan of sparks upward before they fade. The light touches the edge of a drinking horn, then withdraws as the flames lower. From outside comes the soft scrape of wind across the turf, followed by the deeper sound of water against the shore. The reciting voice remains close, neither loud nor theatrical. It seems to belong equally to the person speaking and to the old poem itself. Ink, smoke, and scraped vellum form a quiet scent around you. The darkness beyond the door remains immense, but the fire keeps one small circle of warmth. The word Ragnarök is Old Norse and is commonly interpreted as the fate of the gods. The phrase carries a sense of destiny rather than mere catastrophe, and this meaning shapes the way you enter the approaching events. You are not watching a world collapse through accident alone. You are moving towards a fate that has been known, spoken, and remembered before it arrives. The older poetic form is Ragnarök, while the phrase, Twilight of the Gods, reflects Snorri Sturluson's form, Ragnaröka. The difference matters because language preserves different understandings of the same horizon. Ragnarök is not simply an evening after which nothing remains. It is the fate of the gods within a larger cosmic sequence. The air outside feels sharper now, carrying salt from the dark water and the faint mineral smell of wet stones. A strip of cold lies along the floor beneath the doorway. Your feet remain warm beneath the wool, while your face feels the movement of the night. The firelight makes the smoke visible in slow layers. It curls beneath the roof and gathers in blue-grey folds. On the table, the ink darkens where it has dried around the rim of the horn. The vellum gives off a faint animal scent, almost hidden beneath peat and ash. The hall is small against the coast, yet its quiet seems to hold the shape of distant worlds. The Völuspá tells of the decline of the gods as part of this fate, and the signs of decline appear through broken relationships, moral disorder, and the release of forces long held back. The old boundaries weaken. Oaths lose their strength. Kinship becomes a source of violence instead of shelter. The gods remain present, but the order they maintain begins to fray. The monstrous beings connected with the end of the world move nearer to their appointed places. Giants gather their strength. The great wolf Fenrir, once bound by the gods, waits within the story's future. The serpent Jörmungandr lies around the world, hidden in the sea, while the balance of land and water waits for the moment when restraint can no longer hold. A deeper stillness settles over the imagined sea. You stand near a black shoreline where the tide slides between stones, leaving each surface shining. The wind has weakened. Salt remains upon your lips, and the cold air rests lightly against your hands. Far offshore, the water rises and falls without showing its cause. Above, the sky has lost its last color. The fire behind you is only a warm glow through the doorway, surrounded by walls darkened by smoke. Somewhere within the hall, a page turns slowly. The sound is dry and delicate. Then the voice begins again, steady as the tide. The other principal literary source for the Ragnarök narrative is Snorri Sturluson's Prose Edda, composed in Iceland in the early 13th century. You picture Snorri writing for an audience familiar with skaldic poetry, explaining mythological stories as background for poetic composition. His work was not a direct record of Viking Age speech or belief. It was a learned medieval account, shaped by the needs of poets and by the Christian world in which the manuscript tradition survived. The Prose Edda remains valuable because it preserves names, relationships, images, and sequences that help illuminate the poetic material. Yet it also reminds you that every surviving account has passed through a later age. where memory and interpretation have met. The light on the vellum is soft enough that the letters seem almost to move. A dark stroke widens where the ink has sunk into the fibers. The page bends slightly near its center, casting a shallow shadow along the fold. You smell the sharp trace of ink beside the sweeter scent of peat smoke. Wool brushes your sleeve when you shift against the bench. The person reciting keeps one hand near the manuscript, though the words seem already known. Beyond the turf wall, winter air moves across the shore. The sea answers in low intervals. Nothing hurries. The room holds its warmth patiently. The prose Edda survives in several medieval Icelandic manuscripts, including the Codex Upsaliensis, the Codex Wormianus, and a manuscript also known as the Codex Regius. These witnesses differ in details, arrangement, and preservation, as manuscripts naturally do when words travel through generations of scribes. You are therefore standing beside a tradition with more than one visible form. The Völuspá's traditional manuscript count gives the Codex Regius version 63 stanzas, while modern scholarly editions often present 66. Neither number removes the poem's depth. The variations suggest that the text lived within a culture of recitation, memory, copying, and adaptation. Its authority came not only from a fixed page, but from the power of its remembered voice. The peat fire has burned lower, and the embers now glow beneath a thin skin of ash. Heat gathers close to the hearth, while the corners of the hall turn blue with shadow. A drop of melted snow falls somewhere near the entrance and touches the floor with a quiet click. The wind carries a brief scent of seawater through the doorway. On the bench, the sheepskin has warmed beneath you and holds the shape of your body. The old voice continues beside the winter darkness. Its alliterative lines move like measured footsteps over frozen ground. The pauses are long enough for silence to become part of the poem. The sources were written after Iceland's conversion to Christianity, and they do not provide a direct transcript of Viking Age pagan belief. This distance does not make them empty, but it asks you to hear them with care. The Völuspá and the prose Edda preserve older materials through later hands, within a society that understood the past differently from those who first told these stories. Christian ideas, literary purposes, local traditions, and inherited poetic forms may all have shaped what survived. You are not looking through a perfectly clear window onto the Viking Age. You are looking into a dark room where several layers of memory overlap, each one revealing a little of the world beyond it. The night air moves quietly across the threshold, cold enough to make the fire seem brighter. A faint glimmer remains above the sea, though the shore itself is nearly invisible. Moisture darkens the wooden door frame. The turf walls breathe their earthy scent into the room. Smoke clings to the rafters and settles into the wool of the cloaks. Your breathing becomes slower within the warmth. The reciter's voice is low and even, carrying the names of gods and giants without strain. Each name seems to rest briefly in the air before the darkness receives it. The hall remains unchanged, though the story moves towards its end. The signs of Ragnarök gather gradually, and the poem gives them the weight of approaching weather. A long winter comes, remembered as Fimbulwinter, bringing hardship across the human world. Violence spreads among families and neighbors. The sun is threatened by the wolf that pursues it through the sky. The earth trembles as ancient restraints break apart. Ships move across disturbed waters, carrying forces that have waited through long ages. The gods assemble for their final struggle, not because they expect victory without cost, but because their duties require them to stand in their appointed places. The fate of the gods becomes visible through their choices. The cold outside has deepened, and the sea now breathes with a slow, heavy rhythm. You imagine snow lying over the fields beyond the hall, covering fence posts, stones, and narrow paths between houses. The whiteness absorbs ordinary sounds. A branch bends somewhere in the dark and springs back with a muted creak. Near the fire, The air smells of warm ash and damp wool. The contrast is gentle, cold at the doorway, warmth near the hearth, and beyond both, the same patient night. The world seems suspended between one breath and the next. Odin moves towards his fate with knowledge already carried within him, and you feel the quiet gravity of his decision. He cannot prevent every event, yet he can meet the coming darkness with preparation and courage. Thor faces Jörmungandr, the world serpent whose body has encircled the sea. The struggle belongs to both the end and the order that existed before it. Thor kills the serpent, but its poison reaches him, and he walks only a few steps before falling. The victory is real, though it does not cancel the cost. In Ragnarök, dignity does not depend upon survival. It rests in the faithful completion of a duty. The fire gives a small crack, and a pale spark rises through the smoke. It disappears before reaching the rafters. You hear the sea beyond the door, slower now, almost blending with your breathing. The sheepskin beneath your hands has become familiar, its warmth steady and quiet. The smell of ink remains near the table, mingled with old wood and peat. Outside, the northern light has faded into a deep, even blue. The shoreline is only a suggestion. The hall is a single island of warmth among the dark fields. The divine order is destroyed through fire, flood, battle, and the breaking of ancient bonds. Yet the myth does not present destruction as an absolutely final ending. The land rises again. The sea withdraws. Green ground appears where ash and water had covered the world. Sunlight returns, and a new sun follows the old path through the renewed sky. Human survivors, Lif and Lifthrasir, emerge from their hiding place and begin again. Some gods remain, and the sons of the old gods inherit what can be carried forward. The story's ending, therefore, opens into another beginning. The world is wounded, but it is not erased. The darkness beyond the hall begins to soften at its farthest edge. You cannot yet call it dawn, but the sea has acquired a faint grey surface. The fire is quieter, reduced to red coals beneath fine ash. A trace of warmth remains in the stones. The smoke thins as the wind changes. Your shoulders rest more heavily against the bench. The wool beneath your cheek is soft. Salt air moves once through the doorway and then grows still. Across the water, the first pale northern light lies upon the quiet sea. The renewed world is not described as a return to perfect safety. It remains a world in which memory matters, where the old destruction can still be recalled, and where order must again be tended. The gods, giants, monstrous beings, and human survivors belong to a single cosmic sequence. Each has a place within the movement from beginning to ending, and from ending to renewal. You stand at the edge of this sequence, hearing the names pass through smoke and winter air. The world tree has endured in some form. The land has returned. Sunlight rests once more upon the waters. The story reaches beyond its own ending. The hall is nearly silent now. The peat gives a faint red glow. Ash settles. The sea breathes outside. On the table, the vellum lies pale in the dimness, and the ink has become a series of quiet black marks. The old alliterative meter fades into the room. Cold air touches the doorway. Warmth remains near the fire. The shore is grey. The sky is lightening. Around you, wool, smoke, salt, and wood hold the last traces of the night. You remain beneath the turf roof as the first calm brightness spreads across the water. The worlds are still. The land is waiting. The light returns. In the Norse stories, that returning light belongs to an older order, and its quiet arrival carries no promise that the seasons will remain faithful. You are standing beside a settlement whose people measure the year by lambing, sowing, sailing, drying, and storing. The first winter comes with familiar authority, drawing the evenings inward and laying a clean crust over the path. Snow rasps against the timber walls, while frozen seaweed gathers at the edge of a black beach. Within the houses, stored grain gives off its dry, dusty smell, and wooden bins stand heavily beneath their lids. A dim sun moves behind blowing ice crystals, barely warming the roofs. Long blue shadows lie over the silent settlement, yet the people still trust the calendar, because spring has always followed winter. Fimbulwinter is commonly translated as Great Winter or Mighty Winter, and the name already makes ordinary cold feel larger than the human measure of time. You are watching the first snow settle upon roofs, fences, and stones, while familiar marks remain visible beneath its thin covering. A gate still opens towards the shore, a sled track still curves between two houses, and the old path still descends towards the landing place. Smoke rises from the central hearths in narrow columns before the wind bends them inland. Beneath the eaves, icicles lengthen slowly, clear as glass and hard as bone. The sea darkens beyond the beach, carrying fragments of white foam between the rocks. Night arrives early, though the darkness still belongs to a season that people understand. The prose Edda describes 3 successive winters without a summer between them, and the first begins almost gently within the imagination. You are inside the longhouse as daylight thins across the doorway, listening to snow tick against the timber boards. The rafters hold the scent of smoke, wool, old leather, and grain. A wooden bowl rests beside the hearth, its rim worn smooth by many hands. Outside, wind presses loose snow beneath the door, making a pale line across the threshold. The animals shift in their stalls, and somewhere beneath the roof, a rope creaks against a beam. No birds call from the shore. No wet earth appears beneath the drifts. Still, the people speak of spring as if it were waiting just beyond the next moon. Days pass, and the expected thaw fails to arrive. You walk towards the fields beneath a sky that remains the color of unpolished iron, finding the boundary stones buried to their tops. The paths disappear beneath snow, first in shallow hollows, and then beneath broad, unbroken slopes. A fence becomes a row of uneven humps, while the track to the harbor vanishes entirely. Snow driven from all directions fills the cuts between the houses and smooths the ground into a single white surface. The cold enters through wool, leather, and fur with patient persistence. At the edge of the black beach, frozen seaweed crackles beneath your boots. The sun rises as a dim shape behind blowing ice crystals, and the settlement begins to lose its ordinary rhythm. The Völuspá speaks of harsh winters before the final battle, and its vision does not linger upon weather alone. You are moving through a world where the season has begun to disturb every custom that once gave the year its order. The emptying storehouses are opened carefully, with grain measured by hand and divided according to old promises. Each wooden bin carries the dry smell of stored grain, although the scent grows fainter as the contents diminish. A child asks when the boats will leave, and no one answers with certainty. Nets stiffen beside the walls, unused and white with frost. Long blue shadows cross the silent settlement even at midday. The first winter has become the second, although no summer has stood between them, and the people begin to speak more softly. 3 winters without summer do not merely extend the cold, because the absence of summer removes the middle of the year from memory. You are standing beside a field that should have been green, but its furrows remain hidden beneath wind-packed snow. No grass rises through the drifts, and no scent of wet soil comes from the earth. The calendar marks moons, yet the moons no longer bring their accustomed changes. There is no season for drying fish in warm air, no season for repairing boats beneath a high sun, and no season for filling the bins again. Snow rasping against timber walls becomes the settlement's constant sound. Beyond the houses, the seaweed at the black beach is locked into frozen ropes. The old names of months continue, though their meanings have grown hollow. In the prose Edda, the signs of Ragnarök are explained through a conversation between King Gylfi and Odin, who appears in disguise under the name Har. You are seated within the imagined hall of that questioning king, where polished words carry the weight of distant catastrophe. The speaker describes Fimbulwinter as 3 winters following one another, with no summer to soften the interval. Around the hall, carved beams remain warm beneath the touch of lamplight, while the tale opens a landscape of snow and bitter wind. The explanation moves calmly, almost formally, from one sign to the next. Yet beneath its measured language lies the disquieting knowledge that the old world is no longer recovering. Fimbulwinter has become a passage, and the passage leads towards Ragnarök. The second winter is quieter than the first, because expectation itself has begun to freeze. You cross the settlement at dawn and hear no axe striking wood, no hammer ringing upon iron, and no voices carrying between the houses. Snow rasping along the timber walls replaces the small sounds of work. The storehouses stand with their doors shut, though their bins are nearly empty inside. A dry smell of grain remains in the wood, like the memory of a harvest that cannot return. The sea lies dark beneath a skin of ice near the shore, and frozen seaweed forms pale tangles along the black beach. Above the roofs, the sun appears behind blowing crystals, weak and distant. Long blue shadows stretch across the snow, joining one house to another. The northern environment remembered by these stories was a place where failed summers and long winters threatened food supplies, animals, movement, and the fragile links between settlements. You are following a coastal path that once carried people towards neighbors, markets, and winter gatherings. Drifts have filled the hollows, and the landmarks have become uncertain beneath their smooth coverings. A low ridge resembles a roof, while a buried fence appears like a line of stones. The cold dries the inside of your nose and tightens the skin around your mouth. Wind carries grains of ice across the open ground, striking cloth and wood with a faint, steady rasp. No historical year is assigned to Fimbulwinter in the surviving sources. Its time belongs to myth, although its dangers belong to northern experience. The old poems do not identify Fimbulwinter with a specific archaeological climate event, and no buried layer can be named as the single winter of Ragnarök. You are instead entering a symbolic landscape shaped by remembered hardship, where nature becomes an image of the world's final weakening. The absence of summer makes this season different from an ordinary northern winter, because winter no longer turns towards renewal. Ice gathers along the beach, holding strands of seaweed in dark green coils. The stored grain smells dry and faintly sweet inside wooden bins that echo when opened. A dim sun hangs behind airborne crystals, while blue shadows remain over the settlement. Nothing announces a precise date. The great winter is measured by what fails to return. The Völuspá carries the story from seasonal disorder towards the collapse of human trust, and the movement is gradual within its severe imagery. You are standing beside a hearth where neighbors once gathered beneath the same roof, listening as familiar voices become guarded and distant. The weather has emptied the fields, but suspicion empties the rooms more completely. A sealed chest is moved nearer to one family, and a shared measure of grain is counted twice. The wind presses against the walls, making the boards tremble in their joints. Outside, snow crosses the roofs from every direction, erasing footprints before they can lead anywhere. The black beach is hidden beneath a pale margin of ice. Within the longhouse, silence grows heavier than the cold. The poem's moral collapse is not placed after the physical disaster, but alongside it, as though the failing seasons loosen the bonds that hold people together. You pass a doorway where two families once exchanged food, stories, and news from distant farms. The threshold is now blocked by drifted snow, and no one clears it. Empty wooden bins line the wall, carrying only the dusty scent of former abundance. From the roof comes the fine rasp of wind-driven snow against timber. A lantern gives little light, leaving the corners blue and indistinct. Beyond the settlement, frozen seaweed gathers at the waterline, and the sea seems to withdraw into a dark, motionless distance. The weather remains terrible, yet the colder disaster lies in the loss of confidence between human beings. Brothers are said to fight and kill one another during the prelude to Ragnarök, an image that brings the final crisis into the smallest circle of belonging. You are near a house where kin once slept beneath the same roof, their tools hanging together along the wall. The door remains closed through the pale day, while wind moves powdery snow across the entrance. No raised voice reaches the road, and no clear account travels between the neighboring farms. A bowl stands overturned beside the hearth, and a knife lies untouched upon the table. The smell of old grain clings to the bins, though their interiors are almost bare. Outside, the sun is a dim blur behind ice crystals. The long blue shadows seem to divide the settlement into separate, silent lives. Kinship obligations fail during the same period, and the Völuspá presents that failure is part of the approaching end. You are walking between houses whose inhabitants know one another's names, histories, debts, and winter stores. Once, such knowledge allowed help to travel quickly through snow, with a neighbor carrying fuel or a bowl of porridge across the dark. Now the same knowledge becomes a source of fear, because every household counts what remains behind its own door. Snow rasps against the walls, and the sound continues without pause. The beach is black beneath a rim of frozen seaweed. A thin sun glimmers through the blowing crystals, too weak to soften the white ground. The settlement holds together in shape, while its inner obligations loosen thread by thread. The second winter passes into the third without the customary signs of departure, and the story becomes quieter because even grief has grown tired. You are looking across a valley where fields, paths, and low stone walls have merged beneath a single frozen surface. No green shoot interrupts the snow, and no stream speaks beneath the ice. The air carries the dry scent of grain from a storehouse whose doors have not opened for many days. Timber walls creak as frost contracts the beams. Along the black beach, seaweed is frozen into ridges that resemble dark writing upon white ground. The sun travels a short, pale course behind restless crystals. Evening gathers before the eye can distinguish afternoon from night, and the ordinary calendar loses its rhythm completely. The great winter becomes absolute not because every sound disappears, but because the sounds that remain no longer belong to a living cycle. You hear snow rasping against timber, a shutter tapping once, and ice shifting beneath the shore. No insect rises from the ground, and no bird crosses the low sky. The wooden bins are empty enough to answer with a hollow echo when touched. Their dry grain smell has faded into the colder odor of dust and old boards. Frozen seaweed crowds the edge of the black beach, stiff and brittle beneath the wind. Above the settlement, the sun is reduced to a dim stain behind blown ice. Long blue shadows lie across the houses, and their edges remain sharp even as the light weakens. In Norse myth, the sun and moon are personified, given courses, dangers, and identities that make the heavens part of the same endangered order. You are beneath the winter sky as the pale sun moves low above the horizon, pursued in the imagination by a wolf. The name Skirl is associated with the pursuit of the sun, while Hati is associated with the pursuit of the moon, in later mythographic tradition. Their names pass through the cold air like distant calls, though no animal appears upon the snow. The beach remains black beneath its frozen covering of seaweed. Wind drives ice crystals across your face and against the walls. The sun's light reaches the settlement weakly, and the old distinction between a short day and a final day begins to fade. The wolves belong to a larger pattern in which the heavenly bodies are hunted before the final darkness, and the winter stands close to that interruption. You're watching the moon rise through torn cloud, pale over the snow-bound roofs, while the last daylight drains from the western sky. Somewhere in the mythic distance, Hati follows the moon as Skirl follows the sun. Their pursuit gives movement to the heavens, yet the movement feels less like a natural course than a narrowing escape. Snow moves from every direction across the open ground. The timber walls answer with small creaks beneath their frozen weight. A dark line of seaweed marks the beach, and the smell of emptied grain rests faintly within the houses. Long shadows join the darkness before night has fully arrived. Fimbulwinter stands before the sun is finally swallowed or extinguished, so that the failure of warmth becomes part of a larger ending. You are at the edge of the settlement when the sun appears once more, low and colorless behind a veil of ice. Its light touches the roof ridges without entering the doorways. Snow has covered the paths, and the shore road has become indistinguishable from the fields. The black beach gives back no reflection, while frozen seaweed lies in stiff bands beside the water. Inside the nearest house, empty bins hold the dry smell of wood and vanished stores. Wind moves over the roofs with a thin, rasping voice. For a moment the sun remains visible, and then cloud and crystal draw across it like a closing hand. The old world has not yet broken open, but its strength has been reduced by cold, hunger, darkness, and suspicion. You are moving through halls where weapons remain fastened above the benches, though the hands that might lift them have grown weak. The hearth burns low, and the smoke settles beneath the roof before finding a narrow opening. Snow scratches along the outer boards, repeating its pale, patient sound. Near the doorway, boots stand stiff with frost, the leather hardened by journeys no one can now make. The storehouse gives off only a dry wooden odor, without the deeper scent of grain. Beyond the walls, long shadows cover the settlement. Fimbulwinter has done its work by making survival uncertain and companionship dangerous. The winter's most important narrative function is to weaken the old world before the imprisoned powers break free, and the source is placed that weakening within both nature and society. You are beneath the turf roof as the tale turns towards what has been held back beneath the visible order. The beams overhead are dark with smoke, and the walls retain the cold of the surrounding earth. Outside, snow is driven against the timber in restless veils. The black beach waits under frozen seaweed, while the sea lies beyond it, dark and sealed. Within the wooden bins, only dust remains to answer the touch. No neighbor calls across the settlement, and no kinship promise travels through the night. The world has not vanished, yet it has lost the confidence that once made it habitable. Ragnarök approaches through a landscape where every ordinary protection has become uncertain, and the great winter makes that uncertainty visible. You stand beside a path that once led inland, but snow has raised the ground until the route disappears beneath a white slope. The cold presses evenly against your clothing, without gust or drama. A dim sun hangs behind blowing ice crystals, its pale disk blurred at the edges. Snow rasps against the nearest wall, while frozen seaweed knocks softly together along the black beach. Inside the houses, the dry smell of grain survives in the empty bins like a trace of distant summer. Long blue shadows stretch beneath the eaves. The people remain indoors, separated by timber and silence, while the sky continues its slow decline. The Völuspá allows the moral and physical disasters to mirror one another, with the disorder of seasons leading towards the disorder of human hearts. You are listening to the wind pass through a gap beneath the roof, where it makes a low note between the rafters. No answer follows from the neighboring house. Once, a winter night gathered families into shared warmth, but now each doorway seems to guard a separate remnant of life. The floorboards feel hard beneath your feet, and the wool around your shoulders has lost its softness in the dry air. Outside, snow covers the old tracks, and the beach is reduced to blackness beneath white frost. The sun has become a weak blur. The settlement still has walls, but trust no longer moves freely between them. In this sense, the great winter is not only a story about cold weather, but a story about time losing its promise. You are watching the sky brighten without becoming warm, and the brightness seems detached from any coming change. The calendar hangs beside the hearth, its marks orderly and familiar, although the world outside has ceased to follow them. No thaw loosens the frozen seaweed, and no rain darkens the black beach. Snow continues to rasp against the timber walls, while empty bins retain the dry, faint smell of a harvest long consumed. Blue shadows remain stretched across the settlement, even beneath the pale noon. The sun rises because it still has a course, yet the course now appears fragile, as though the wolves were already close. The tale returns again to the 3 winters without summer, and each repetition makes the interval feel less like weather and more like an enclosure. You are within the 3rd winter now, where the air seems stripped of all softness. The snow has hardened across the fields, shaping the world into ridges, hollows, and narrow passages. At the shoreline, frozen seaweed forms dark teeth along the black beach. Wind-borne crystals drift past the houses and strike the wood with a faint, dry rasp. The storehouse stands open, revealing bins that are empty except for a little dust gathered in their corners. Across the settlement, long blue shadows lie motionless. No summer separates one winter from the next, and the people have forgotten the feeling of waiting for green things. The final darkness is preceded by the failure of familiar light, and the sun's danger gives that failure a face. You are looking towards the eastern horizon as the sun rises behind a moving veil of ice. Skirl follows it in the old image, while the path of the moon remains threatened by Hati when night returns. The wolves are not weather, nor are they historical explanations, but figures for a world whose regular motions are being hunted down. Snow crosses the roofs from every direction. The black beach holds its frozen fringe of seaweed, and the houses smell of old wood rather than full stores. The light reaches your face coldly, without warmth. Above you, the sky keeps moving, though its promise of another morning has begun to narrow. The last images of Fimbulwinter gather around this weakening light, leaving the world poised before the powers of Ragnarök are released. You are standing beside the shore beneath a sky that has lost its color. Snow rasps along the walls behind you, and frozen seaweed rests in brittle layers upon the black beach. Within the settlement, empty wooden bins hold the dry scent of grain that is no longer there. Long blue shadows cross the snow, passing beneath doors and along buried paths. The sun appears once more through blowing ice crystals, pale enough to resemble the moon. Its familiar course continues, yet the wolves remain close in the mythic imagination. Winter has silenced the calendar, kinship has failed, and the old world waits beneath the cold for darkness to interrupt the light. You are standing within the high enclosure of the gods, where the walls rise cleanly from the frozen earth, and the halls remain warm beneath their timbered roofs. Snow rests upon the outer stones, while inside, footsteps pass softly over packed floors and guarded voices speak beside the fire. Among these ordered dwellings, Fenrir is growing. Fenrir, also called the Fenris wolf, is the son of Loki and the giantess Angabotha. He is one of 3 monstrous children associated with Loki and Angabotha, the other 2 being the Midgard serpent and Hel. The gods have heard prophecies concerning all 3, and they understand that danger may be born beneath a familiar roof. Yet Fenrir is still young, and the gods raise him among themselves because they fear what may happen if he is left beyond their sight. Around you, the air carries the dry scent of ash and old wool, mingled with the faint warmth of horses in the adjoining yard. Fenrir moves through the enclosure on heavy paws, brushing against posts that were once tall beside him. His coat is dark beneath the torchlight, not black exactly, but shaded like deep water beneath winter ice. A narrow, silk-like cord rests cool against your fingers as you stand near the threshold, and somewhere beyond the wall, a raven shifts upon a beam. The wolf's breath is wet and pale in the winter air, rising and vanishing beneath the roof timbers. At first, Fenrir is fed and watched by the gods, who measure his paws, his shoulders, and the increasing length of his jaws. He learns the paths between the halls, the places where meat is stored, and the voices of those who approach him without fear. Surtr alone comes near with a steadiness that does not depend upon kindness or denial. The others speak of the prophecy in quiet rooms, remembering that Fenrir will one day threaten the order they have built. Fenrir grows rapidly, faster than any ordinary creature could grow through the turning seasons. His shoulders soon rise against the waists of the gods, and his teeth show whenever he yawns beside the longhouse door. The enclosure that once seemed generous begins to feel narrow around him. The gods decide that he must be bound, not because he has yet committed the deeds foretold, but because the prophecy has placed a shadow upon every day of his life. Muted daylight enters through smoke holes and thin seams between the planks, settling in grey strips across the floor. The wooden bowls near the hearth have been washed, though a little grease remains upon their rims. From the yard comes the soft drag of a chain, followed by the muffled stamping of a horse. Fenrir lies beneath the eaves, and each breath stirs the powdery snow. The cold air moves across your face whenever the door opens, carrying the mineral smell of stone and the distant bitterness of iron. The gods bring forth the first fetter Leidinga, made with strength enough to satisfy the eye and weight enough to make the ground answer beneath it. They invite Fenrir to test himself against the binding, presenting the act as a game and speaking of honor rather than fear. The wolf accepts, for pride is already awake in him, and the gods fasten Leidinga around his body. Fenrir stretches once, gathering his limbs beneath him, and the metal tightens with a long groan. He extends his forelegs, arches his back, and pulls against the fetter until the stones beneath his paws shift. Leidinga breaks. The fragments lie scattered in the snow, and the gods say little while Fenrir watches their faces. The failure has given him knowledge, and knowledge has made him more difficult to deceive. Beyond the enclosure, the afternoon has faded into a dim blue dusk, and the first stars emerge above the roofline. Snow covers the broken pieces of Leidinga, leaving only small dark curves visible upon the white ground. You can smell frost upon the air, sharp and clean, while the wolf's wet breath gathers close to the earth. No one laughs now. The quiet has acquired the weight of iron, and every movement seems to wait for the next sound. A second fetter is brought forward, named Dromi, broader and heavier than Leidinga, with links that catch the torchlight like dull red eyes. The gods place it upon Fenrir, and again suggest that he prove his strength before them. The wolf has understood that their confidence is false, yet he agrees because he wishes to show that no restraint fashioned by their hands can diminish him. Dromi holds for a little longer. Fenrir lowers his head, braces his paws, and draws his body forward with a force that bends the rings against one another. The metal screams along the ground. Then, with a sudden crack beneath the snow, Dromi fails, and Fenrir steps free into the falling darkness. The gods see that ordinary force cannot contain him, while Fenrir sees the fear they have tried to conceal. The night settles upon the yard, with the softness of wool placed over a sleeping animal. Iron fragments shine faintly where the snow has not covered them, and frost gathers upon the edges of the broken links. A cold wind passes between the buildings, stirring loose straw and making the gate hinge complain. You feel the narrow, silk-like cord again against your fingers, light enough to seem useless, while nearby the wolf's paws leave deep impressions in the pale earth. The gods send messengers to the dwarfs, who dwell beneath the ground where stone remembers every pressure and metal sleeps within the dark. The request is not for a chain that can be seen as strong, but for a binding that will hold what strength alone cannot hold. The dwarfs listen, and their craft turns towards things that cannot be gathered by ordinary hands. They make Gleipnir, a magical binding that appears soft and slender but cannot be broken. It is made from 6 impossible ingredients: a cat's footfall, women's beards, mountain roots, bear's sinews, fish voices, and bird spittle. Each substance belongs partly to the world and partly to the silence behind it, so that Gleipnir carries the mystery of things that leave no visible trace. The dwarf's work continues beneath layers of rock, where no wind reaches and no snow enters. You are close enough to imagine the tools moving over a dark bench, drawing out a cord as narrow as woven silk. Its surface seems smooth beneath your fingers, cool and almost weightless. It has the quiet resilience of a root beneath stone, the hidden tension of a sinew, and the delicate gleam of frost along a feather. Nothing about it announces imprisonment. Gleipnir is carried back to the gods, who examine its narrow length with uncertainty. It resembles a ribbon, yet it resists the hands that pull it. It bends without creasing, coils without sound, and rests upon the snow as though it has no greater weight than a strand of hair. Fenrir looks at it and understands that the gods have found something unlike Lidinga and Dromi. The gods bring Fenrir to an island in the lake Amsvartnir, where dark water lies between the rocks and the wind moves without interruption. They tell him that Gleipnir is another test, a demonstration of strength that will restore their trust. Fenrir is suspicious, and he asks how such a frail cord could be removed if it proves too strong. The gods promise that they will release him when he has finished testing it. The water around the island breathes against the shore, drawing pebbles backward and leaving them shining. Thin ice forms in the hollows between black stones, and the smell of cold water reaches you through the winter air. Gleipnir rests across your palm like a narrow, silk-like cord, cool and smooth, while the wind lifts its end and lets it fall. Fenrir's breath is wet against the cold, and the sound of his breathing seems larger than the island. Fenrir agrees to the binding only if one of the gods places a hand in his mouth as a pledge. The gods look among themselves, and the old fear becomes visible in their faces. To steps forward, for he has often approached the wolf with courage that is neither careless nor proud. He places his hand in Fenrir's mouth, knowing that the pledge may become a wound. Gleipnir is wrapped around Fenrir's legs, chest and shoulders, then fastened to a great stone driven deep into the island. The wolf pulls, but the cord gives no answer. He twists, gathers his limbs, and throws his weight against the binding, yet Gleipnir remains smooth and slender. The gods have achieved what they desired, and the softness of the cord has become harder than iron. For a while, the island holds only the sounds of strain and water. Fenrir's claws cut furrows into the frozen earth, and small stones roll towards the shore. His hand remains between the wolf's teeth, warm at first, then cold where saliva touches the skin. The gods stand around them, their cloaks moving in the wind, while a narrow cord lies pale against the dark coat. Fenrir waits for the binding to be removed. He tests the gods with his eyes, watching their hands remain still and their promises become smaller. When they refuse to release him, the wolf closes his jaws. To loses his hand, and the price of trust falls heavily upon the stones. The gods bind Fenrir more securely, placing a sword between his jaws so that he cannot close them again. His mouth remains open, and the blade holds his tongue away from his teeth. Foam gathers along his lips, and the air fills with the low sound of his anger. To returns without his right hand, carrying the mark left by a broken promise. The sun has disappeared beyond the rim of the island, though the western sky retains a faint grey brightness. Blood darkens the snow near his feet, soaking slowly into the frozen surface. The water makes a hollow sound among the rocks, and the sword gives a small metallic tremor whenever Fenrir moves. A thin line of venomous cold seems to pass through the air, though no serpent is yet visible. Fenrir remains bound until the events of Ragnarök in the prose Edda. He is not destroyed, and he is not forgotten, but held beneath the world while seasons pass above him. His imprisonment becomes part of the architecture of the god's security, another stone placed against the coming disaster. The fetter holds because it was made from impossibilities, though nothing made by the gods can erase the prophecy. In the long interval, the island grows familiar with silence. Snow gathers upon the stone, melts during brief thaws, and freezes again in clear skins. Sea birds cross the sky, their calls thinning over the water. You hear the faint scrape of the sword between Fenrir's jaws, followed by the measured rhythm of his breathing. Beneath the snow, the earth remembers the first cracking of Lidinga and the failure of Dromi. Elsewhere, Loki's story has moved towards a different kind of imprisonment. After the death of Balder, the gods pursue him, and the old cunning that once passed between them becomes an offense requiring punishment. Loki is captured and bound, not by a single magical cord, but through measures intended to make his suffering last. The order he once disturbed now turns its weight upon him. The sources preserve differing details about the names and parentage of Loki's sons. In Snorri's account, the son used in the binding is named Nari or Nafi, though the traditions do not always agree upon which name belongs to which child. Such differences remain like separate tracks beneath snow, visible for a moment before weather and time cover them again. Loki is fastened with the entrails of his son Nari, or Nafi in Snorri's account. The gods take what belongs to kinship and transform it into restraint, making a bond from the body of a child. They place Loki beneath a serpent whose venom drips steadily towards his face. The punishment is intimate, patient, and arranged around the slow movement of time. The cavern is colder than the halls above, and water gathers in dark seams between the stones. A metal bowl catches one slow drop after another, each sound clear enough to separate from the silence. The serpent shifts overhead, and the faint hiss of venom joins the damp breathing of the earth. Stone, iron, and bitter poison share the same air, while Loki lies beneath them without the comfort of daylight. Loki's wife, Sigyn, remains beside him, holding a bowl beneath the serpent's mouth. She catches the venom as it falls, protecting Loki's face for as long as the vessel remains empty. Her posture becomes part of the cavern, still and patient, while the bowl grows heavier in her hands. The world above continues to turn, though below, each moment is measured by a drop. When the bowl fills, Sigyn must leave to empty it. During those brief absences, the venom falls directly upon Loki's face, and his body twists beneath the pain. The earth shakes with his movements, and the walls of the cavern shed small grains of stone. When she returns, the bowl is raised once more, and the punishment resumes its slow arrangement of waiting and interruption. A dim light enters through a crack far above, touching the wet rock without warming it. Sigyn's hands are pale around the metal bowl, and the rim has become cold enough to redden her fingers. One drop falls, then another, and the bowl answers each with a careful ringing note. Beyond the cavern, winter presses against the mountain, while within, the faint hiss of venom never entirely stops. Loki remains imprisoned until Ragnarök, held apart from the halls where his bargains once shaped the fate of gods and giants. Fenrir is bound upon his island, while Loki lies beneath stone, and both restraints are maintained by those who believe order can be preserved through force. Their punishments become part of the future they were meant to prevent. The old arrangements persist for many years. To carries the absence of his hand through the ordered halls, Sigyn returns again and again with her bowl, and Fenrir breathes behind the sword. The gods continue their feasts, their watchfulness, and their ceremonies, while the imprisoned figures remain beneath the surface of their world. Control appears successful because the breaking has not yet begun. Snow lies upon the roofs of Asgard, smoothing the edges of beams and shields. Inside the halls, embers settle into red layers, and resin gives the air a faintly sweet smell. Outside, the wells are rimmed with ice, and the horses stand beneath woven coverings. Far below, water traces the stone in darkness, and the bowl beside Loki receives another drop with a small, patient sound. Then the signs of Ragnarök begin to gather, and the barriers built by the gods no longer seem permanent. Fenrir breaks free from his binding, tearing Gleipnir apart, as though it were only a thread drawn across his path. The sword falls from his mouth, and the jaws held open for so long become instruments of destruction. He advances against the gods. The island shudders beneath Fenrir's paws, and the water withdraws from the rocks before returning in a dark rush. Gleipnir lies broken across the ground, its impossible ingredients scattered into the unseen places from which they came. Snow collapses into the cracks opened by his movement. The sound travels outward across the frozen shore like a signal. The Völuspá describes the wolf as coming from the east with his mouth open wide. His movement carries the sense of a storm crossing the world, though his shape remains unmistakably that of the child once raised within the god's enclosure. The wind moves around his shoulders, and his shadow falls across the fields before his body reaches them. The prose Edda describes Fenrir's upper jaw reaching towards the sky and his lower jaw towards the earth. His mouth becomes a measure of the world's division, touching the height above and the ground below. Between those jaws, the gods see the consequence of their earlier decision, when fear led them to raise, test, deceive, and finally bind him. Across the eastern horizon, the light has a strained and coppery color, as though dawn has been mixed with ash. The wolf's breath spreads in wet clouds through the winter air, and each step presses deep into the frozen soil. The earth smells of torn roots and cold iron. Overhead, birds scatter without calling, leaving the sky open above the enormous dark shape. Loki also emerges from imprisonment when Ragnarök arrives. The entrails that held him no longer keep him beneath the stone, and the serpent's venom no longer governs the rhythm of his body. He returns to the movement of the world, carrying the knowledge of every injury, every oath, and every confinement. His release brings cunning back into the open at the same moment that Fenrir brings force. Within the cavern, the metal bowl lies overturned, its last drops spreading across the stone. Sigyn stands with empty hands, and the serpent's hiss is lost beneath a deeper trembling. Rock breaks along the ceiling, allowing pale fragments to fall into the old place of punishment. Loki rises through dust and darkness, while beyond the mountain, the bound wolf crosses the widening world. The release of Fenrir and Loki turns the gods' earlier attempts at control into the immediate cause of their final confrontation. Fenrir was raised among the gods because they feared the prophecy concerning him, and that fearful closeness led to the fetters, the deception, and the wound to Surtr. Loki was bound after Baldur's death, and his long imprisonment deepened the enmity that returns with him at Ragnarök. The gods have not merely failed to prevent the future. Their methods have helped prepare its arrival, placing each grievance beside the next, until restraint becomes a path towards violence. The sword in Fenrir's mouth, his missing hand, Sigyn's exhausted vigil, and the torn entrails of Loki's son all remain within the final reckoning. The fields beneath Ragnarök are no longer quiet, though snow still lies in the hollows between stones. Fire colors the clouds, and ash moves along the ground in low veils. Far away, metal strikes metal, and the sound travels through the cold air with a dull, repeated force. Fenrir's paws disturb the white surface, while Loki's footsteps appear among the marks left by armies. Fenrir comes from the east with his mouth open wide, and the world seems to enter that darkness. The distance between his jaws holds the last measure of the old order. The wolf is no longer a growing child within the enclosure, nor a captive upon the island, but the prophecy given shape. Loki moves through the same final landscape, released from the serpent and the stone, while the gods prepare for the meeting they once believed could be postponed. The old bonds are broken, but they have not vanished without leaving traces. They remain in the habits of fear, the memory of betrayal, and the knowledge that a promise refused may return as a wound. A thin wind passes over the ruined ground, lifting strands of ash and carrying the smell of scorched timber. Beneath your feet, the earth feels warm in one place and cold in the next. Snow melts around the stones, forming narrow streams that reflect the red light above. In the distance, something breaks with a sound like ice splitting across a lake, and the silence afterwards seems wider than before. The gods' final confrontation begins with the consequences of these earlier bindings. Fenrir advances against them, Loki returns to the field, and the careful boundaries of Asgard loosen under the pressure of what has been held back. No cord remains unbroken, no bowl remains full, and no promise stands untouched by its fulfillment. For a long while, the story has moved through enclosed places, the gods' halls, the island of binding, and the cavern beneath the stone. Now those boundaries open into the world. The wind reaches every surface, carrying salt, ash, and the cold scent of distant water. The ground trembles beneath the returning powers, and the old darkness comes quietly at first, like night entering beneath a door. Fenrir, the Fenris wolf, is remembered as the child of Loki and Angerbotha, one of 3 monstrous children whose names became inseparable from the fear of Ragnarök. The Midgard serpent circles the world, Hel governs the realm of the dead, and Fenrir crosses the final field with the sky and earth between his jaws. Their stories begin in kinship, continue through restraint, and end where the gods' order can no longer hold. The last light rests upon the broken remains of Gleipnir, turning the narrow fragments pale against the dark soil. Somewhere behind the hills, a metal bowl receives no further drop. The wind settles into the hollows, and the wet breath of the wolf drifts across the winter air. Stone and iron grow quiet, while the world waits beneath the loosening sky. You are kneeling beside a quiet body in a timbered room, where the hearth's last warmth has faded into the boards. The hands lie folded, and beneath the fingernails a little darkness remains from the work of ordinary life. With a small knife, you trim the nails carefully, as people have done for generations beside beds of death. Each clipping falls onto a cloth, light as a sliver of horn, while the room holds the faint smell of wool, ashes, and cold earth. Outside, the shoreline receives the night tide. Tar darkens the stones, wet rope lies in loose coils, and the hollow knock of timber against water travels through the stillness. In the account preserved by Snorri, such small clippings possess a dreadful importance. The nails of the dead are not merely remnants of the body, but fragments gathered towards the making of Naglfar, the great ship associated with Ragnarök. The name Naglfar is commonly interpreted as nail ship or ship of the dead. Both meanings remain close to the image, because the vessel is imagined as a ship built from what death leaves behind. You can picture the clippings carried away from the room, beyond the reach of the family, beyond the scattered settlements and winter fields. In darkness beneath the ground, they join other nails gathered from countless bodies. There, the ordinary scale of a human hand gives way to a vessel beyond measure. A nail becomes a plank in the mind, a clipped crescent becomes a fastening, and the remains of many lives begin to suggest a single immense hull. The shoreline remains dark beneath a low sky. Grey water lifts and settles against the stones, while the smell of tar and wet rope gathers in the air. Snorri says that Naglfar is made from the fingernails and toenails of the dead. He also says that cutting the nails of the dead delays the ship's completion, giving a practical household action a place within the slow machinery of the world's ending. You are still near the body, yet the thought has moved far below you. Each careful cut becomes an interruption, a small delay placed against the distant work of the ship. The instruction carries a quiet severity because it gives the living a task that seems modest, yet reaches into the final age. To trim the nails is to keep the great ship unfinished for a little longer. No single hand could ever complete Naglfar. Its construction belongs to accumulation, to years without counting, to the patient gathering of what the dead leave behind. The image gives approaching time a physical weight. The ship does not suddenly appear from nowhere, already prepared and waiting for its crew. Instead, Naglfar grows slowly, almost geologically, through the gradual movement of generations towards their graves. Its arrival is delayed by the smallest acts of care. Far beneath the winter fields, The unfinished hull rests where no daylight reaches. Around it, darkness presses against timber that has never known a forest, a workshop, or the hand of a living shipwright. Water moves somewhere beyond the walls. A huge hull creaks in the dark, though no ordinary vessel lies near the tide. You may imagine the ship waiting in a cavern beneath the world, its ribs rising like the arches of an underground hall. The timbers are blackened by age, and the nails of the dead lie among them like pale grains. The surviving mythic account describes Naglfar as the largest of ships. Its dimensions are not measured by oars, mast, or cargo, but by the power of the image itself. A vessel larger than every known ship becomes a moving boundary. It is too great for a harbor, too burdened for calm seas, and too closely connected with death to belong among ordinary journeys. You stand upon a dark shoreline while the unseen ship waits below. The tide continues its hollow knocking, and the wet rope beside your feet grows cold with salt. In Scandinavian life during the Viking Age, shipbuilding stood near the center of travel, trade, warfare, burial, and memory. A ship carried people from one shore to another, across waters that separated communities and worlds. Because ships were familiar and powerful, a ship became an especially strong image for movement between worlds. The myth takes a known technology of travel and changes its substance. Naglfar is therefore not a strange shape invented without reference to human experience. Its meaning depends partly upon the ordinary sight of a hull resting on a beach, a mast leaning against the sky, and oars being lifted from dark water. Yet the transformation is complete. The vessel is no longer made from living timber alone, but from the remains of the dead, gathered beyond the limits of human craft. You are beside a Viking Age landing place at the end of a wet afternoon. The beach is marked by drag lines, footprints, and the dark shine of tar along a half-raised keel. A rope tightens and loosens against a wooden post. Somewhere inland, rain touches the thatch with a soft, irregular sound, while the sea breathes against the shore. Norse graves and ship burials demonstrate the symbolic importance of ships within Scandinavian culture. Boats placed in the earth, or graves shaped around vessels, suggest journeys, status, remembrance, and passage. They do not prove a direct connection to Naglfar. The burial ship and the ship of the dead belong to different kinds of evidence, even when the images seem to echo one another. You may notice the distinction resting quietly between them. A grave can show that ships carried symbolic meaning, but it cannot tell you that a particular burial practice created the myth of Naglfar. The sources do not describe a historical Viking vessel that inspired the ship. No excavated hull can be identified as its model, and no voyage recorded in human history explains its enormous form. Naglfar belongs instead to mythic imagination, where familiar materials are drawn into a larger pattern. It takes the shape of travel and gives it the weight of accumulated death. The wind moves inland from the water. Salt spray reaches the grass, and the shore stones shift beneath the shallow wash of the tide. Above the world, Fimbulwinter has begun. The winters stretch onward, severe and without relief, while the usual sequence of seasons loses its softness and balance. You feel the cold gather across the fields, not as a sudden storm, but as a long alteration in the character of the air. Snow lies over roads and thresholds, and daylight seems increasingly distant. In the northern stories, the world does not end in one instant. Its order weakens through a series of changes, each one making the next more possible. The sun and moon are threatened, kinship turns against itself, and the old restraints begin to fail. Beneath these disturbances, Naglfar continues its slow construction. The ship waits, while the living world above it enters Fimbulwinter. It waits beneath ice, beneath soil, and beneath the memory of the hands that clipped the nails of the dead. The approach of Ragnarök, therefore, begins before Naglfar reaches the sea. Its progress is already present in the thinning of boundaries and the weakening of time. The shoreline has become almost colorless beneath the long winter sky. Grey water lifts beneath a low cloud, and the timbers of an abandoned landing stage hold a faint, oily scent. You walk along the beach without finding the ship. The ground remains firm beneath your feet, yet the impression of immense movement seems to pass through it. A distant creak comes and goes in the dark. It resembles the strain of a hull turning against a tide, though the nearest boats are drawn high upon the sand. Snorri's description places Naglfar among the forces opposing the gods. It is not a neutral vessel, carrying travelers without allegiance or purpose. The prose Edda associates the ship with the enemies of the gods, and the vessel carries those enemies towards the final battlefield. Its passengers belong to the approaching host of destruction. The sources do not state that every dead person sails on Naglfar. The ship is not presented as a universal transport for all who have died. Instead, the image gathers certain hostile forces into one movement. The dead become part of a wider opposition, while the ship itself turns them into an army approaching the world of the gods. You hear wet rope sliding over a hidden cleat. The sound is slow, fibrous, and heavy, followed by a hollow knock beneath the surface. The water has begun to change. It rises against the shore with greater force, lifting seaweed and broken branches that were left above the ordinary tide. In the mythic sequence, floodwaters connected with the rising Midgard serpent help bring Naglfar into motion. The serpent's disturbance belongs to the same collapse that releases the ship. You can imagine the sea pushed upward by something too vast for the water to contain. Waves spread across low ground, and familiar coastlines disappear beneath a widening sheet of grey. The ship is no longer held in its hidden place. Its hull moves through darkness, first with a single groan, then with the deeper sound of an immense structure answering the current. The movement is not hurried. Naglfar travels with the measured inevitability of water finding a lower course. Behind it, the old separations between land and sea, living and dead, begin to dissolve. Ahead, the final battlefield waits beneath a sky that has forgotten its former order. The wind strengthens over the dark shoreline. Salt spray is carried inland, touching the coarse grass and the lower branches of the trees. You stand where the tide has covered the familiar stones. The sea feels broader now, and the horizon has become a soft, unbroken band beneath the clouds. Far out upon that water, the creak of a huge hull moving in the dark reaches you through the wind. The sound is deeper than the groan of any ordinary boat. The ship advances from the east in the account of Völuspá. In the commonly transmitted text, a vessel comes from the eastern direction, and Loki stands at its helm. You may hold the image gently, without trying to force it into a single exact shape. The eastern sea opens before the ship, and the dark figure at the steering place guides it towards the gathering conflict. Loki's presence at the helm connects the vessel with the old pattern of betrayal and release. He has been bound, yet the bonds of the gods cannot remain secure forever. The ship's arrival belongs to the final movement from confinement to open conflict. What was held below ground or beneath restraint now enters the open world. Naglfar sails without concealment. Its appearance is a public sign that hidden dangers have crossed into visible history. Along the shore, the rain has thinned into a fine mist. Drops gather on rope fibers, and the water makes a soft tapping against the sides of a stranded boat. The poem's image does not stand alone. It comes among signs of upheaval, when the known order is loosened and hostile powers move towards one another. You see the eastern horizon as a line of dull silver. Nothing distinct appears there, yet the sea seems to carry a pressure that travels ahead of the ship. Völuspá gives Loki as the helmsman in the commonly transmitted text. Snorri's Gylfaginning, however, names the giant H-Shrim as Naglfar's captain. The difference is small in wording, but important in what it reveals. The poetic and prose traditions do not preserve identical details. You are not asked to choose between them, as though one account must erase the other. The two versions remain beside each other, each preserving a different arrangement of the story. Loki guides the ship in one tradition, while Hrym guides it in another. The vessel remains recognizable, though the hand upon its steering oar changes. This variation is natural within a body of myth, transmitted through poetry, performance, memory, and later writing. Stories retain their central movement while details shift at the edges. You are on the deck now, though the deck is too broad to feel like any human ship. The planks extend into darkness, wet beneath your feet and cold through the soles of your shoes. The air smells of tar, brine, and old timber. Ropes as thick as tree trunks lie coiled beside the mast, their surfaces rough with salt and age. No lantern burns along the rail. The darkness is lit only by a dim reflection from the clouded sky, spread across the boards like watered ink. Around you, the ship carries the enemies of the gods. Their forms remain indistinct, gathered between mast and stern, while the wind passes through them without warmth. The dead are present, but the sources do not give you a complete catalogue of their identities. Naglfar is not explained as a vessel filled by every human grave. Its passengers belong to the larger forces of opposition that move against the gods. Giants, dead beings, and other enemies overlap within the approaching host. The hull gives a long, low groan. Beneath it, grey water rises and drops, lifting the ship with the slow strength of the open sea. The darkness around Naglfar is not empty. You hear the muted shift of bodies, the drag of rope, and the occasional knock of timber against the waves. Snorri's prose presents Hell's realm and the forces of the giants through several overlapping images. These do not form one uniform afterlife system, with every inhabitant arranged in a single order. You move through the thought of Hell's realm as through a landscape scene in winter mist. One path leads towards the dead, another towards the giants, and the outlines between them remain uncertain. The ship belongs to this uncertainty. It is associated with the dead, yet it also carries the forces opposing the gods, and its captain may be Loki or Hrym. Such differences need not weaken the story. They show that the tradition preserves several layers of imagination, meeting around the same final movement. The creaking vessel becomes a point where separate images touch. Death, giant power, broken bonds, and rising water all find passage through one enormous ship. Mist hangs above the sea in low bands. The surface reflects no clear stars, and the wind brings the cool mineral scent of deep water. You place one hand against the rail. The timber is swollen and uneven, with a grain that seems to twist away from ordinary growth. Below, the tide folds against the hull. Each impact produces a hollow knock, as though the sea were tapping upon a sealed chamber. The ship is made from the remains of the dead, yet it moves with the strength of something born from the earth itself. Its construction joins bodily fragments to wood, salt, iron, and darkness. You feel no warmth from the passengers nearby. Their presence is known through the pressure in the air, the crowded silence, and the shadows beneath the rigging. Naglfar is large enough to seem less like a boat than a traveling piece of landscape. Its hull rises and falls with the sea, while the horizon disappears behind its upper timbers. The vessel's size gives the approaching conflict a physical scale. The enemies of the gods do not arrive as a small band upon a narrow craft. They come across open water with a structure vast enough to bear the weight of an age ending. The ship is an argument made from timber and remains. You listen as the mast bends slightly in the wind. The ropework strains, then settles, while spray touches your face in a fine, cold veil. Behind the ship, the eastern water is already altered by the serpent's rising. Waves move in long, uneven ridges, and distant land lies beneath the flood. You sense the connection in the changing tide. The water lifts because the serpent rises, and the ship advances because the water has lost its ordinary limits. No oars beat against the waves. Naglfar requires no visible rowers because its movement belongs to the greater forces of Ragnarök. Wind and flood carry it forward. The ship is drawn towards the final battlefield by the collapse of the world around it. The sea does not seem to choose a direction. It simply rises, bears the vessel, and continues beneath a sky growing darker by degrees. Rain passes across the open deck. It gathers in shallow lines between the planks, carrying small fragments of pale material towards the scuppers. You watch one piece catch against a knot in the wood. It may be bone, shell, or nothing more than a chip of weathered timber. The uncertainty suits the ship. Naglfar is described through an image of remains, yet no account gives you a complete inventory of its materials. Snorri's statement remains clear enough. The fingernails and toenails of the dead contribute to the vessel's construction. His instruction about trimming them gives the living a means of delaying its completion. Beyond that, the imagination widens. The ship becomes an enormous body assembled from death, without ever becoming the corpse of one person. Its planks seem to hold the memory of many graves. Its ropes carry the strain of generations, and its keel presses through waters touched by the rising serpent. The great ship associated with Ragnarök continues towards the final movement of the myth, carrying its burden into the east. The night deepens over the water. Wind moves through the rigging with a hollow tone, and wet rope shifts against the deck in slow, heavy loops. You are far from any harbor now. The land has become a dark line behind you, softened by rain and distance, while the open sea extends ahead without interruption. The vessel's arrival does not represent an ordinary raid. It is not a voyage undertaken for settlement, trade, or the taking of a single town. Naglfar carries enemies of the gods towards the battlefield where the old powers meet. The ship makes conflict mobile, bringing the distant and the hidden into one place. Its passengers move with the same inevitability as the flood. They are carried out of confinement and into open opposition, where the gods can no longer keep them apart. The image recalls the earlier restraints placed upon dangerous beings. Fenrir was bound, Loki was bound, and the serpent lay beneath the sea. Now the restraints fail together. The ship crosses the water as the wolf breaks free and the serpent rises, joining the same widening rupture. A thin brightness appears beneath the clouds. It does not illuminate the deck, but it outlines the upper edge of the mast. The sea below is almost black. Small waves pass along the hull, each one leaving a narrow line of pale foam. You hear the ship's timbers answering the pressure of the water. The creak begins near the bow and travels towards the stern, like a voice moving through a sleeping house. The ship's name remains near you: Naglfar, Nail Ship, Ship of the Dead. Each phrase offers a different doorway into the same dark structure. Nail Ship draws attention to construction, to the physical detail that makes the vessel possible. Ship of the Dead turns the craft towards its passengers and destination. The two interpretations remain connected without being identical. One describes what has been gathered, while the other describes what the gathering has become. You repeat the name silently as the vessel proceeds. Naglfar moves beneath the low sky, rides the rising water, and carries the enemies of the gods. The words have the steady rhythm of a tide. They return as quiet points of recognition, while the surrounding sentences continue to change. Morning does not come clearly. A grey light spreads through the clouds, and the sea loses some of its darkness without becoming bright. You see the eastern direction open before the bow. There is no harbour there, no familiar headland, and no sign of human settlement. The ship advances across open water towards a battle that the gods have long foreseen. Its path leads into the final gathering of forces, where prophecy becomes immediate presence. The gods know that Ragnarök approaches, though knowledge cannot prevent the event. Their foresight gives the ending a solemn shape, not an escape from it. Naglfar therefore travels through a world already understood as doomed. Its movement confirms what the gods have anticipated, while bringing the final conflict nearer. The ship's arrival is one of several signs that the boundaries between living, dead, gods, and giants are failing. Categories that once held the world apart begin to overlap. The dead rise into motion, giants approach the divine stronghold, and the sea itself becomes an instrument of release. Wind presses against the sails, though their color cannot be seen beneath the clouds. Salt spray blows across the deck and settles upon the rail. You stand at the forward end of Naglfar, facing the open water. The boards rise beneath you, then fall, carrying your body with the measured rhythm of the swell. The darkness behind you contains the gathered host. Nothing is spoken, yet the ship does not feel empty, and the silence has the density of a crowded hall. Somewhere near the steering place, the captain holds the course. In Völuspá, Loki stands there in the commonly transmitted text. In Snorri's Gylfaginning, Hrym, the giant, is named instead. The difference remains visible within the tradition, a quiet reminder that the sources preserve no single final arrangement of every detail. The ship itself survives both versions. Whether Loki or Hrym guides it, Naglfar remains the largest of ships, built from the dead and directed towards war. You hear the deep knock of water under the bow. Each impact rises through the timber, passes beneath your feet, and disappears into the darkness behind the keel. The sky lowers over the sea. Clouds press close to the mast, and the cold air moves along your face with the taste of salt. Naglfar continues its journey from the east. The ship crosses grey water while the flooded world opens around it, stripped of the boundaries that once made every shore secure. The final battlefield does not yet appear. It remains beyond the horizon, held in the distance by the slow pace of the vessel and the immense scale of the sea. This delay gives the story its peculiar gravity. The ship is moving, yet the end does not rush towards you. Its unfinished construction has already created a slow sense of approaching time. Generations delayed the vessel by trimming the nails of the dead, but the delay cannot last forever. Now the ship is complete enough to sail. The little acts of care have reached their limit, and the accumulated remains have become a hull beyond measurement. Naglfar carries the final age within its timbers. Its voyage is the outward expression of everything that has been waiting below. A pale wind passes over the sea. It bends the surface into long lines, and the waves shine briefly before returning to their dull grey color. You look back towards the place where land should be. Nothing remains visible except mist, rain, and the faintest darkening beneath the western clouds. The ship has left the world of harbors. No living shipwright stands beside it, and no familiar crew adjusts the ropes or calls across the deck. Its movement comes from floodwater, wind, and the pressure of mythic time. The vessel is carried forward because the world itself has begun to move towards its ending. Around you, the enemies of the gods remain gathered. Their presence belongs to the final host, not to a simple account of every soul who has entered Hell's realm. The sources offer several overlapping images for the dead, for giants, and for the places beyond ordinary life. Naglfar passes through those images without reducing them to one system. You feel the hull lean as a larger wave arrives. The mast gives a long creak, and the ropes draw tight with a sound like distant leather. The water beneath Naglfar rises beneath a low sky. Flood and tide seem to have become one continuous motion, carrying the vessel towards the land of battle. The Midgard serpent's rising remains part of that motion. Its body disturbs the sea, and the disturbed water bears the ship onward. You cannot see the serpent through the water. Its presence is known through the scale of the waves, the altered horizon, and the way the ship rides higher than before. Naglfar, the nail ship, crosses the open sea. It's the ship of the dead. It carries the enemies of the gods. The names return quietly, never as a chant, but as small points of recognition within the larger darkness. The ship's arrival belongs to Ragnarök, the final movement from confinement to open conflict. Bound beings are released, Hidden powers emerge, and the old order gathers itself for the last encounter. The wind falls for a moment. Without it, the sails sag, and the vessel glides upon the flood with a sound softer than speech. You hear water passing along the hull. It slides beneath the boards, folds away behind the stern, and returns in broken ripples against the sides. The pause does not stop Naglfar. The ship continues because its course has become part of the world's final direction. Far ahead, the gods wait near the battlefield. Their longed-for knowledge has made the coming meeting familiar in thought, though no knowledge can make it gentle. Naglfar approaches with the enemies of the gods, and the distance between ship and shore becomes smaller beneath the clouded sky. You may sense the old categories failing one by one. The dead are no longer still, the giants are no longer distant, and the divine strongholds no longer remain entirely protected. Sea covers land, flood releases what was hidden, and a vessel made from remains crosses into the open world. The ship's timbers strain once more. Tar and wet rope fill the air, while a broad swell lifts Naglfar beneath the paling sky. You are standing at the bow as the horizon begins to show a darker line. It may be land, cloud, or the distant edge of the battlefield. No harbor welcomes the vessel. No household fire shines from the shore, and no living hand reaches out to take the ropes. Naglfar travels towards the conflict that the gods have long foreseen. Its passengers remain silent, carried by the same immense movement that has brought the wolf from restraint and the serpent from the sea. The difference between Loki and Hrim remains within the story, preserved like two channels flowing towards one river. The ship's identity does not depend upon a single captain's name. What matters is the crossing. A familiar form of travel has become a vessel of the dead, and the vessel has entered the last passage of the world. You feel the deck rise beneath you. Water breaks against the forward timbers, and cold spray moves inland across the darkness. Behind the bow, the great hull follows with a slow, resonant creak. The sound travels through every plank, as if the ship itself were breathing. Naglfar is no historical Viking vessel. It belongs to a mythic sea, assembled from the remains of the dead and moved by the rising waters of Ragnarök. Its image may draw strength from the central place of ships in Scandinavian life, and ship burials may show how strongly vessels could signify passage and memory. Still, the sources give you no direct proof of a historical model. Naglfar remains a transformation, turning the familiar technology of travel into something assembled from death. The shore ahead grows darker. The sea continues lifting beneath the low sky, and the wind carries the smell of salt across the approaching battlefield. You stand upon Naglfar while the final host moves with you. The god's order lies somewhere beyond the water, weakened but not yet gone. There is no sudden arrival in the scene. The ship advances by degrees, crossing grey water beneath a sky that holds no clear sun. The slow passage preserves the geological feeling of its construction. The nails of generations were gathered gradually, and the completed vessel now moves with the same patience. You hear the hollow knock of timber against the tide. It comes from beneath the deck, steady and deep, while the enormous hull rises into the morning mist. Naglfar, the largest of ships, continues towards open conflict. The name rests within the sound of the water, and the ship of the dead draws nearer to the final field. The gods have long foreseen this crossing. Beyond the eastern horizon, the battlefield waits, and the ship carries the enemies of the gods towards it. Grey light lies across the waves. Wet rope darkens beside the mast, tar glistens along the seams, and salt spray settles upon the weathered rail. You look ahead through the mist. The sea and sky meet without a visible border, while the ship's bow keeps its patient direction. The last restraints have loosened. The dead move with the hostile forces, the giants approach, and the waters of the world bear Naglfar into view. Nothing in the scene suggests an ordinary voyage. The vessel does not seek a safe landing, and the host aboard it does not return to any familiar home. It crosses because the boundaries between worlds have failed. It carries death into motion, brings hidden powers into the open, and joins the sea to the final battle. You remain at the forward rail as Naglfar sails onward. The hull creaks beneath the thinning night, and the water lifts it towards the place where the gods await. The ship does not turn back. Its nails, its dead, its captain, and its immense shadow all belong to the same approaching hour. Across the open water, the first shapes of the battlefield gather beneath the low sky. The wind strengthens, and the sails draw full. Naglfar moves towards Ragnarök, carried by flood and tide, while behind it the old world recedes into mist. Ahead, Vigrid lies beneath a sky that has lost its ordinary signs. No familiar road crosses the horizon, and no star keeps its appointed place above the plain. In Snorri's Gylfaginning, Vigrid is vast beyond ordinary travel, extending 100 leagues in every direction. The measure gives the battlefield an almost unearthly breadth, as though the whole earth has opened to receive the final gathering. The Völuspá names Vigrid as the place of the last conflict, though it does not preserve Snorri's measurement. In the poem, the name carries the weight of a remembered boundary, marking the ground where separated powers finally meet. You are standing upon frozen grass that reaches away beneath a colorless morning. The blades bend under a skin of rime, and pale crystals gather along your boots. A horn note travels across the empty ground, at first so distant that it seems woven into the wind. The sound enlarges without haste, passing over hollows, ridges, and abandoned paths. The Gjallar horn has sounded from the watch place of Heimdallr. In Snorri's account, Heimdallr blows the horn to signal the beginning of Ragnarök, and the gods hear its summons through the trembling world. Its tone is unlike the call of a hunting horn or any music intended for delight. It is broad and severe, carrying through stone and cloud, while the frozen earth gives a faint answering tremor. From high halls, distant strongholds, and the roads between worlds, the gods assemble for the final conflict. Giants, monsters, and other enemies also move towards Vigrid, drawn by the same appointed hour. Around you, hooves strike the hardened ground in irregular patterns. Armor shifts against armor, leather creaks beneath metal, and the cold air bears the smell of iron, frost, and old smoke. The Einherjar leave Valhalla, the slain warriors gathered there after death, and go towards the battlefield beside the gods. Their ranks carry the memory of countless earthly fights, though this struggle has no earthly prize. The sound of the Gjallar horn seems to awaken every sleeping power. It summons the defenders of the established order, while beyond the horizon, the enemies of that order approach beneath their own dark banners. Yggdrasil trembles as the catastrophe draws near. Its roots, branches, and ancient passages endure the shaking of a universe in which the boundaries between places have begun to fail. A deep vibration moves beneath the frozen grass, arriving before the armies themselves. It rises through the soles of your feet and travels upwards as a slow pressure in the bones. The battlefield gathers beings previously separated by divine boundaries. Gods, giants, beasts, dead warriors, and powers from distant regions now approach the same open ground. The old divisions remain visible in memory, but they no longer restrain movement. What once belonged to one realm or another now crosses freely towards the center of the final meeting. You hear more than one army, though the sounds cannot be separated for long. There are hoofbeats beneath the wind, the drag of enormous feet, and the clatter of weapons lifted from their resting places. Vigrid receives every road. The plain stretches beneath the dim sky, and all paths now laid towards the same gathering. The Völuspá does not describe the final conflict with the same arrangement of encounters found in the prose Edda. The two sources preserve related visions, but they differ in sequence and detail. In one account, the horn announces the beginning, the gods take their positions, and the great enemies meet them in battles remembered by name. In another, the images move with greater poetic freedom, passing between fire, noise, broken bonds, and the collapse of the world. You stand where the wind has flattened a wide circle in the frost. The air feels unusually still near the ground, while higher currents move rapidly through the torn clouds. Odin advances towards Fenrir, the wolf whose power has grown beyond the measure of ordinary creatures. The meeting carries the gravity of a long debt, because the god and the beast have belonged to the same approaching prophecy. The wolf opens its jaws, and the darkness between them seems wider than any mouth should contain. Odin raises his weapon, surrounded by the last warriors who followed him from Valhalla. There is no hidden road by which the encounter can be avoided. Odin meets Fenrir in the final conflict, and the wolf's appointed victory closes around him with terrible certainty. The Einherjar continue forward as the struggle begins. Their shields form shifting lines, and their feet press the frost into the earth until the grass disappears beneath churned soil. No strategy can alter the shape of this hour. The final battle is not presented as a contest whose outcome might be changed by a clever movement or a concealed reserve. The courage of the gods lies elsewhere. They meet their appointed enemies despite knowing the result, and their knowledge does not make their steps smaller. Across the plain, Thor confronts the Midgard serpent. The serpent rises from the surrounding waters with a body so vast that its coils seem to belong to the horizon itself. Its breath carries poison across the battlefield. The air becomes sharp and bitter around you, while distant warriors turn their faces beneath shields and lowered helmets. Thor lifts Mjolnir against the serpent, and the clash of their powers gathers the force of storm and sea. The hammer strikes its mark, yet the god has already received the venom that will end his life. 9 steps carry Thor away from the fallen Midgard serpent. Then the poison overcomes him, and the thunderer falls upon the ground where the sea wind passes through the broken grass. The plain receives the sound of the hammer's last movement. It rolls outward beneath the armies, mingling with the cries of beasts and the cracking of weapons. Freyr fights Surtr in Snorri's account. Freyr has given away his sword, and the absence of that weapon enters the encounter like a quiet wound remembered too late. Surtr bears the bright blade associated with the final burning. Its edge gives off a radiance unlike the cold light of morning, and the battlefield brightens around him with an unnatural fire. Freyr meets the flame-bearing enemy without the sword that might once have served him. Their combat unfolds amid smoke and frozen dust, while other struggles continue at the edges of sight. The fire has not yet crossed the entire plain, but wind carries ash before the flames arrive. Small dark particles settle upon the armor of the Einherjar and disappear into the seams. Another encounter gathers near the older boundaries of the god's world. To fights the hound Garma, a creature associated with the threshold of the dead and the violence released at Ragnarök. The hound's jaws close upon the god, whilst his hand and weapon seek the vital place beneath its throat. Both sustain wounds that cannot be endured. Tyr and Garma die in the encounter. Their bodies remain together upon the ground for a moment, joined by the struggle that has consumed them. You smell scorched grass now, although the nearest flames remain distant. Heat moves across the frozen air in uneven waves, and the frost vanishes in narrow, shining lines. Heimdallr and Loki meet among the disorder. The guardian who sounded the Ji-Jalar horn faces the trickster whose movements have long unsettled the order of the gods. Their weapons pass through smoke and blowing ash. Neither encounter is described as a simple victory, because the old world has brought its opposing powers together without offering them release. According to Snorri's account, Heimdallr and Loki kill one another. The horn-bearer and the wanderer fall together, and the sound that gathered the armies has no further call to make. The deep vibration beneath the earth becomes stronger as the battles multiply. You feel it through the frozen ground. beneath the movement of hooves and the impact of heavy bodies. Vigrid remains enormous around every encounter. The distance between Odin and Fenrir, Thor and the Serpent, Freyr and Surtr, Tyr and Garma, and Heimdall and Loki cannot be measured by one glance. Yet the plane holds them within one final field. Every separate chamber of the conflict opens towards the same horizon, where fire, water, and darkness wait beyond the armies. The Völuspá uses repeated images of fire, movement, noise, and broken bonds. Its vision advances through things coming loose, rising, striking, burning, and passing beyond the forms that once contained them. You watch a line of shields dissolve beneath the charge of a giant host. Frozen grass lifts in clumps beneath the feet of the combatants, and the air fills with pale fragments of earth. A roar travels along the battlefield, beginning among the beasts and enlarging through the voices of warriors. It loses its individual sources until it becomes one continuous pressure against the chest. The gods and the Einherjar hold their ground as long as the appointed struggle permits. Their courage does not depend upon the hope of survival, because the truth of the ending has entered the first sound of the horn. Odin's fall does not stop the wolf. Fenrir moves through the battle with the force of something released from every former restraint. The wolf's shadow passes over the plain, covering weapons, shields, and patches of dying fire. Around you, the frozen grass bends beneath a sudden pressure in the air. A son of Odin comes against Fenrir after the wolf has swallowed the god. The younger power avenges his fallen father, and the great beast's movement finally reaches its limit. The accounts preserve the encounter in different forms and with different emphasis. The Völuspá and the Prose Edda do not match in every sequence, and no single arrangement removes the strangeness of the vision. What remains constant is the meeting itself. Gods, monsters, giants, and dead warriors stand together upon Vigrid while the structure of the old world begins to fail. Far beyond the plain, the sea rises against familiar shores. The Midgard serpent has disturbed the waters, and waves move over places that once held roads, homes, fields, and temples. The cold ground beneath you becomes damp in shallow hollows. Meltwater gathers around stones, reflecting the red glow of fire that has not yet reached the nearest ridge. Surtr lifts his sword, and the light around its blade grows wider. Flames appear along the borders of the battlefield, moving through grass and timber with steady, consuming patience. The unnatural fire brightens Vigrid from edge to edge. Armor catches the radiance, ash turns briefly silver, and the faces of the warriors appear carved from heated metal. The sound of combat changes beneath the rising blaze. Metal still strikes metal, yet louder noises now come from breaking wood, collapsing earth, and burning forests. You feel the heat upon one side of your face, while the other remains touched by cold wind. Ash moves past you in slow spirals, carried ahead of the advancing flames. The appointed enemies continue to meet their opponents. No order restores the boundaries between realms, and no messenger travels outward to summon help from beyond this world. The final battle is therefore both crowded and strangely solitary. Each god enters a particular encounter, while every encounter occurs within the immense silence surrounding Vigrid. At the edges of sight, giants move through firelit vapor. Some carry weapons, some bring only their enormous bodies, and some appear as shapes that the smoke can scarcely preserve. The Einherjar fight among these beings with the discipline of warriors accustomed to ordered halls. Their ranks break and gather again, though the earth beneath them can no longer promise a lasting surface. Yggdrasil shakes more violently as the catastrophe passes through its roots and branches. Leaves, bark, and fragments of old soil fall from the world tree into spaces where no ordinary wind is blowing. A low groaning passes through the ground, deeper than thunder and slower than the movement of the armies. It sounds like timber bending within a house too large for any human dwelling. The world tree does not simply stand apart from the final battle. Its trembling reveals that the conflict reaches through every layer of the cosmos, touching roots, heavens, seas, and halls of the dead. Vigrid fills with smoke, but its vastness remains perceptible through the shifting brightness. Snorri's 100 leagues in every direction become a measure of distance swallowed by fire. The Völuspá offers no corresponding number. Instead, the poem places the battlefield within a sequence of visions, where motion and destruction matter more than the surveying of its boundaries. You hear the Gjala horn no longer. Its first note has completed its purpose, and the world itself now supplies sounds larger than any instrument could produce. Hooves strike wet ground where frost has melted. Armor drags through ash, and the feet of distant giants send repeated vibrations towards the place where you stand. The wind carries the smell of burning wood, hot metal, salt water, and soil turned over by too many passing bodies. Nothing remains untouched by the approaching change. Fire crosses the plain in long, uneven fronts. It moves through dry grass, fallen shields, broken wagons, and the scattered remains of structures carried there from other realms. The old landscape becomes difficult to remember beneath its altered colors. Hills glow along their edges, rivers reflect red light, and the sky hangs low above a world without familiar signs. The conflict begins to diminish, not because peace has returned, but because the materials of conflict are disappearing. Weapons fall into mud, banners burn, and voices weaken beneath the elements. You stand among fragments that no longer belong clearly to any one place. A splinter from a hall rests beside a giant's broken weapon, while a warrior's shield floats in rising water. The boundaries once guarded by gods have opened completely. What distance, law, fear, or divine authority had separated now mingles within the same burning and flooding landscape. The Völuspá's broken bonds have become visible everywhere. Chains fail, enclosures open, roots tremble, and the old order releases the beings it had held apart. The end of the battle is not an empty instant. It unfolds through fire and water, through the sinking of known ground and the disappearance of familiar signs. Surtr's flames move beyond Vigrid towards the wider earth. Their brightness reaches forests, settlements, mountains, and the distant edges of the sea. Water rises after fire. The established world is burned or submerged, and places that once carried the names of gods and people pass beneath altered surfaces. The air cools in some regions, even while other horizons remain red. Steam gathers above flooded ground, softening the outlines of rocks and ruined walls. You hear the last distant footsteps as deep tremors fading through the earth. The sound moves away, enters the water, and becomes indistinguishable from the settling of the land. No ordinary dawn follows immediately. The light remains strange, filtered through smoke and vapor, while the sky begins to clear above a world emptied of its former arrangement. Vigrid lies beneath the changing heavens, no longer simply a battlefield, and not yet a place of renewal. Its name remains within the memory of the cosmic order that has passed through it. The gods have met their enemies. Odin has faced Fenrir, Thor has confronted the Midgard serpent, Freyr has fought Surtr, and two has died with Garma. Heimdallr and Loki have fallen together according to Snorri's account. Their deaths belong to the same final passage as the sounding of the Gjala horn and the trembling of Yggdrasil. The Völuspá and the Prose Edda preserve different arrangements of this catastrophe. Their differences do not lessen the force of the scene, because each text directs the gaze towards the breaking of old boundaries. You remain beside the cooling ground as ash settles upon the water. The surface carries faint circles where drops fall, and each circle widens before the next appears. The noise of Ragnarök has diminished into scattered crackling, distant surf, and the occasional collapse of a burning tree. The battlefield holds its silence beneath the fading smoke. The established world has ended in its former shape, but existence has not been erased beyond all possibility. The The battle marks a transition between cosmic orders rather than the permanent end of everything. Beneath the drowned and burned landscape, the future remains concealed. The old names have been carried away by fire and water, while other forms wait beyond the ruined horizon. The wind passes over Vigrid with less violence than before. It lifts a little ash from the grass, moves across the empty plain, and leaves the ground almost still. The vast battlefield no longer gathers armies, yet its breadth surrounds the remnants of the final meeting. 100 leagues in every direction, Snorri's measure settles into the quiet like a distant recollection. The Völuspá's unnamed distance remains equally present in the silence. Its vision has given the plain significance without enclosing it in a number. You look across the low horizon where the fire has faded to a dull red line. Water covers the hollows, and the frozen grass has become dark beneath its thin skin of ash. The last warmth leaves the stones slowly. Their surfaces remain dry in places, while others shine with moisture gathered from the rising mist. Above you, the sky begins to recover a faint depth. The clouds separate in narrow passages, though no familiar constellation yet returns to its former place. The earth beneath your feet no longer carries the old certainty. It trembles only slightly, as though the roots of Yggdrasil are settling after the long disturbance. The horn has gone silent, the warriors have fallen, and the enemies have completed their appointed meetings. Beyond Vigrid, fire and water continue their patient work. You stand within the transition between what has ended and what has not yet appeared. The plain grows quiet beneath the changed sky, and the world waits beyond its own destruction. The world waits beyond its own destruction, and you stand where the last certainties have fallen quiet. Ash lies across the plain like a dark snowfall, settling upon broken shields, splintered spear shafts, and stones warmed by the fire beneath them. A raven's wingbeat passes over the windless field, stirring a small veil of grey dust that turns once and disappears. Far away, thunder rolls beneath the horizon, followed by a silence so complete that the faintest falling grain of ash seems audible. The air tastes of smoke, iron and rain that has not yet reached the earth. Beneath your feet, Vigrid has lost the movement of armies, though traces of their passing remain in every hollow. The sky is dim, neither wholly burning nor wholly dark, and a pale brightness gathers behind the smoke. You remain among the names that have fulfilled themselves, waiting for the deaths to become part of the world's renewal. The first name lies beneath the shadow of the wolf. Odin is the chief god of the Aesir in the surviving mythological sources, and his authority extends across the worlds of gods, humans, giants, and the dead. You have known him as a seeker of wisdom, a giver of victory, a wanderer beneath broad hats and weathered cloaks, and a ruler whose knowledge reaches into the roots of fate. At Ragnarok, that knowledge does not save him. Fenrir, the great wolf, breaks free from his bonds, crosses the field, and opens his jaws before Odin. The wolf swallows Odin. The sentence is simple, though the moment surrounding it is immense. The chief god of the Aesir is taken by the creature whose future danger was understood long before the final battle. In the central narrative tradition, including Snorri's account, Fenrir's jaws close over Odin, and the old order loses the figure who once stood at its center. A cold wind moves through the remains of Vigrid, carrying the dry scent of burnt grass and the mineral bitterness of opened stone. Smoke drifts close to the ground, thin enough for you to see the marks left by hooves and feet beneath it. Somewhere beyond the fallen weapons, a heavy shoe scrapes against ash-black earth, deliberate and unhurried. No horn answers it, and no shield rises. Above you, the light changes by such a small degree that the darkness seems to breathe rather than recede. A raven settles upon a bent spear, its claws making a faint wooden tick. The field holds no warmth except in the stones, and even that warmth is fading. Through the smoke, The outline of a wolf remains vast and indistinct, while the place where Odin stood has become empty. Yet Odin's death is not left without an answer. His son Vidar comes towards Fenrir with the patience of someone who has carried a single purpose through the whole length of the world. You see no haste in him, because haste belongs to those who still believe that time can alter the appointed moment. Vidar steps across the ash, each movement measured against the memory of Odin's fall. His silence is not uncertainty. It is the quiet of a duty already understood. Snorri describes Vidar as possessing a special shoe or reinforced footwear prepared for this encounter. The shoe allows him to place his foot upon Fenrir's lower jaw, holding the wolf's mouth open against its own terrible strength. His hands reach towards the upper jaw, and the struggle becomes a contest between the wolf's immense body and the son's unwavering position. Vidar kills Fenrir. The revenge is patient and deliberate, and Odin's name passes through it without needing to be spoken aloud. The son does not defeat fate by rescuing his father. He fulfills the place assigned to him within the final pattern. Ash gathers in the seams of Vidar's footwear, soft as flour and dark as cooled charcoal. The reinforced sole presses into the ground, finding firmness beneath the loose surface. You feel grit carried against your ankles, while small fragments of bone and wood shift beneath each careful step. A raven's wing beat crosses above the smoke, though the air below remains strangely still. The wolf's breath carries a heat like a furnace mouth, and the earth trembles whenever its paws strike. Then the sound narrows into leather, ash, and the low strain of weight meeting weight. No rain comes to soften the field. The silence after each movement seems to lengthen, as though the world itself is making room for Vidar's purpose. Odin's absence remains near you, not as a voice, but as a shape within the silence. The wolf falls, and the next encounter belongs to Thor. Thor is the principal protector of Midgard in the mythological tradition, a defender of human settlements against the forces pressing in from the giant worlds and the deep places of nature. His hammer has crossed the sky with thunder, and his strength has been measured against mountains, serpents, giants, and the limits of the divine body. His final opponent is the Midgard serpent, the enormous child of Loki and Angerbotha, coiled around the human world beneath the sea. You stand beside the dark water as Thor draws the serpent upwards. The coils rise through waves turned black beneath the changing sky. Thor lifts his weapon, and the final encounter between protector and serpent gathers all the old hostility into one meeting. The Midgard serpent opens its mouth, releasing venomous mist from dark scales, while Thor stands within the drifting poison and strikes. The blow kills the serpent, and the sea receives the weight of the creature that once encircled Midgard. Thor takes 9 steps after killing the serpent. Then the venom overcomes him, and Thor collapses. The number 9 appears repeatedly in Norse mythic traditions, although the surviving sources do not explain its symbolism here. Its presence remains like a measured interval within the story, 9 steps between victory and death. The shore is cold beneath a sky streaked with copper and violet, and the waves withdraw over stones polished by forgotten tides. Venomous mist rises from the serpent's scales, folding around Thor's legs before thinning into the wind. Each scale catches a dull reflection, like a fragment of night holding a submerged star. The smell of salt is joined by something sharper, bitter enough to tighten the throat. Thunder follows the strike of the hammer, then gives way to silence over the water. You hear only the retreating foam and the slow weight of Thor's footsteps upon the shore. 9 impressions remain behind him, each filling gradually with seawater. The hammer lies near his hand, its metal darkened by spray and smoke. Beyond the beach, the sea continues to move as though it has not witnessed the death of its oldest enemy. Thor's 9 steps form a narrow passage between triumph and ending. You can count them across the wet stones, from the place where the serpent's body shudders to the point where Thor's strength leaves him. The first step is heavy, the second steadier, and the third accompanied by a faint crackle beneath the skin. By the fourth, the mist has reached his chest. The fifth carries him past a ridge of black rock, and the sixth leaves a red mark where one foot slips. The seventh is shorter than the others. The eighth turns slightly towards the inland road. The ninth comes beside a pool filled with rainwater and ash. Then Thor falls. The Midgard serpent lies dead, and the principal protector of Midgard lies dead beside it. The old guardianship has ended, though the human world will one day receive protection from other hands. Thor's death does not cancel his role. It completes the final shape of that role. A thin rain begins to descend upon the shore, making small circles in the pools between the stones. Steam lifts from the serpent's scales where the drops meet them, and the venomous mist disperses into the damp air. Your face feels cold beneath the rain, while the ground retains a deep warmth from the violence that has passed through it. Pieces of seaweed cling to the rocks like dark ribbons, and the tide draws them gently back towards the open water. The hammer's handle is wet, and a line of silver runs along its edge. Above the horizon, smoke forms a long veil, glowing wherever the fire beyond the world touches it. The beach has no voice now except the repeated hush of waves. 9 footprints remain visible for a while, then soften under the rain. The serpent's death also carries the memory of its beginning. The Midgard serpent was the child of Loki and Angabotha, born into a family whose names gathered danger around them. Its brother was Fenrir, the wolf who swallowed Odin, and its sister was Hel, who received the dead in her divided realm. The serpent was cast into the sea, where its body grew until it encircled Midgard and held its own tail within its mouth. You have seen its existence as a threat, but the myth places that threat within a lineage. Loki's children are not merely wandering monsters without origin. They belong to a chain of decisions, fears, imprisonments, and prophecies. The gods' attempts to contain them help prepare the world for the destruction they fear. The serpent waits beneath the sea until Thor meets it, and Fenrir waits in his binding until Vidar arrives. Their deaths answer one another across land and water. The family of Loki and Angabotha stands at the center of the final pattern, even where the children appear to oppose the gods. The sea settles gradually around the dead serpent, though its coils remain visible beneath the surface like ridges of a drowned landscape. Water slips over rough scales, leaving them black, blue, and silver in the uncertain light. A distant gull cries once and falls silent. The air smells of wet ash, brine, and the faint sweetness of crushed grass carried from inland. Your clothing gathers moisture at the shoulders, and rain beads along the backs of your hands. Beneath the water, something large shifts as the tide finds a new course around the fallen body. The motion is slow enough to seem peaceful. Thunder passes overhead without lightning, and afterwards the world becomes very still. In that stillness, the serpent's long existence seems to narrow into a single dark line beneath the waves. Beyond the shore, another warrior waits without the weapon that once made him secure. Freyr faces Surtr at Ragnarök. Freyr is associated with peace, fertility, prosperity, bright seasons, and the generous abundance of cultivated earth. Yet his final battle is not fought with the sword that once fought by itself. He gave that sword to Skirnir in connection with the courtship of Jörða, and the earlier decision remains present when the final enemy comes. You see Freyr standing before Surtr with a weapon less suited to the battle. His death is therefore connected to an earlier choice, not simply to the final conflict. The gift made in the service of love and alliance becomes part of the condition under which Freyr meets his fate. A decision made in a quieter time has traveled with him across the years, arriving at Ragnarök as surely as any prophecy. Surtr is a fire-associated giant, and the Ragnarök narrative gives him a bright or flaming sword. Its light shines through the smoke, making the air around it appear transparent for a moment. Freya moves towards that brightness without the sword that once fought independently, and the meeting between them becomes brief, terrible, and complete. Freya falls before Surtr's fire. The ground near Surtr has hardened into plates of dark glass, each reflecting a broken piece of the burning sky. Heat moves across your face in slow waves, drying the rain that still clings to your sleeves. The bright sword shines through smoke, red at its edges and white near the center, like a narrow sunrise held in a hand. Ash rises in spirals where the blade passes, though no wind carries it beyond the circle of flame. The smell of scorched earth mixes with the green scent of crushed stems, reminding you that Freya's gentler powers are not absent even here. Somewhere behind the smoke, a seed pod bursts in the heat, making a soft, wooden click. The air trembles above the ground, and every distant object seems to waver. You hear the quiet fall of embers before the next breath of fire crosses the plain. Freya's missing sword remains an invisible presence between him and Surtr. The weapon had once been able to fight by itself, and its absence is more than a practical disadvantage. It is a mark left by Freya's generosity, by the exchange that enabled Skirnir to travel towards Jörðr and secure the courtship. The god of abundance gives away what might later have protected him, and the story allows that gift to retain its full consequence. You stand within the memory of that earlier decision while the fire advances. Freya's death does not mean that love was mistaken or generosity worthless, nor does the narrative offer a neat division between wise choices and foolish ones. A life can be shaped by an act that brings happiness to others and vulnerability to the one who acted. The final battle reveals the long reach of ordinary decisions, even when they were made far from any battlefield. Surtr's flaming weapon closes the distance, and Freya's appointed fate becomes visible in the brightness. The fire moves with a dry, steady roar, consuming fallen branches before they can blacken completely. Smoke gathers in layered curtains, and the light behind it changes from gold to orange, then to a color nearly white. Warm air presses against your cheeks while cold ash settles upon your hair. Under the heat, the glassy earth gives small sounds, like distant chimes breaking one by one. The scent of pine resin rises from a burning grove, followed by the heavier odor of wet bark and old leaves. A raven crosses the upper sky, its wings dark against the fire, and vanishes beyond the smoke. The plain has become a place where summer and winter seem to meet. The deaths continue, each one closing a particular relationship between power and purpose. To fight Garma, the hound associated with the boundaries of the dead. The surviving accounts preserve the encounter in compact form, allowing two possibilities within the tradition. To kills Garma and dies from his wounds, or Garma kills to and falls in the same struggle. In either telling, the hound and the god die together. You see to approach the hound with the knowledge that courage does not guarantee survival. To has long been connected with law, oaths, order, and the difficult balance required when promises bind even the powerful. One of his hands was lost during the binding of Fenrir, and that earlier sacrifice remains written into his body when he meets Garma. The god who helped secure the wolf cannot stand outside the consequences that follow from the binding. Garma lunges through the smoke. To receives the attack, answers it, and remains standing only long enough for the encounter to reach its appointed end. God and hound fall together, and the boundary between them becomes quiet. The place of T's last struggle is strewn with stones pale beneath the ash. A heavy shoe drags across the ground nearby, leaving a shallow line that fills with powder. The hound's breath comes harshly, carrying the sour warmth of a creature driven beyond exhaustion. T's remaining hand grips a blade dulled by use, and the metal gives a muted ring whenever it touches the earth. A narrow beam of light enters through the smoke, revealing floating grains that turn slowly in the air. There is no open wind, Yet a raven's wingbeat passes over the field and stirs the ash around your feet. Distant thunder arrives late, separated from its flash by a long, empty interval. When the combat ends, the silence seems larger than the battlefield. Turangama show that the final order is not restored by preserving every guardian. Some of the gods die while protecting the boundaries they once maintained. Some fall while confronting the enemies that defined their strength. Others are overcome because an earlier kindness, promise, or gift has altered the conditions of the final encounter. The pattern does not treat these deaths as failures in the ordinary sense. Fate is not defeated by the gods, nor by their enemies. It is fulfilled through them. The ash around you has cooled enough to touch, though warmth remains below its surface. Small stones retain the shapes of footprints, paw marks, and wheel tracks, while softer earth has become smooth beneath the falling dust. The sky contains no clear direction, and the horizon is hidden behind smoke that glows faintly from within. Rainwater collects in shallow hollows, reflecting pieces of cloud and occasional sparks. The smell of iron is fading, replaced by wet soil and the dry fragrance of burned reeds. A distant branch falls with a soft report, then nothing moves for several breaths. You can feel the world pausing between two forms, as though its substance has become attentive. Even the dead appear to belong to this waiting, held within the same silence as the living. Heimdallr and Loki meet in another final exchange. Heimdallr is the watchman of the gods, stationed at the edge of their realm, and the one whose horn announces Ragnarök. Loki stands on the opposing side, bound by old hostility and by the consequences of his actions. Their conflict has been prepared by the entire history of suspicion between them. When the final battle reaches its center, Heimdallr and Loki kill one another in Snorri's account. You see the watchman and the trickster cross the smoke-filled ground. Neither figure needs to be introduced to the other. Heimdallr carries the clarity of vigilance, while Loki moves with the restless intelligence that has disturbed every settled arrangement around him. Their weapons meet once, then again, and the contest turns inward, becoming less a struggle for advantage than the closing of an old argument. Heimdallr falls. Loki falls. The horn that called the worlds to attention has already sounded, and the one who opposed its meaning lies beside the one who carried it. A faint brightness rests upon the broken horn, its surface scratched and dulled by soot. Smoke passes through the hollow end, producing a low breath that resembles a note without becoming music. You stand near a ridge of stones where the ground still trembles at long intervals. The air is cooler here, carrying the clean scent of exposed rock beneath the smoke. A raven lands upon the highest stone and folds its wings, its dark feathers shining with a blue edge. Far away, fire continues to move, but its roar has become muffled by distance. Thunder travels over the plain and ends in sudden silence. The watchman's fallen shield reflects a narrow strip of pale sky. Near it, a broken blade lies half-covered, and one small leaf has settled upon its handle. The deaths of Heimdallr and Loki close a circle that began with watchfulness and disruption. Heimdallr guarded the threshold, while Loki repeatedly crossed boundaries between order and disorder, kinship and betrayal, comedy and terror. Their final encounter is not an isolated duel, because every earlier meeting has prepared its shape. The gods do not survive because they defeat fate. They survive when they survive, by fulfilling their roles within it, and the same principle holds for those who oppose them. You remain among the consequences, where every death has become part of the world's next movement. Odin is gone, though his knowledge has not vanished without remainder. Thor has fallen, though Midgard will not remain forever without protection. Freyr is dead, though the earth's fertility will not be erased by the fire. Tyr and Heimdallr have disappeared, though law and vigilance will have places in the renewed order. Fenrir, the Midgard serpent, Surtr, Garma, and Loki have also fulfilled what belonged to them. The old world has not simply lost its inhabitants, it has completed its structure. The smoke thins above a field where no banners remain. Beneath the ash, the soil is dark and damp, holding seeds, roots, and fragments of grass that survive the heat. A little stream finds a path between two stones, carrying soot towards the sea. Its sound is softer than the earlier thunder, steady and almost domestic. The air smells of rain now, with a trace of moss rising from the shaded ground. You feel the temperature falling around your hands, while the stones beneath you slowly release their last warmth. A raven lifts from the broken spear and crosses the empty distance without calling. Its wingbeat is the only movement above the plain. The fire remains visible far away, but its light no longer governs the whole sky. Among the dead, Balder waits beyond Ragnarök. Balder was killed before the final destruction, brought down through the scheme involving Hertha and the mistletoe. His death was one of the first great signs that the divine order could not protect itself from sorrow. Yet the story does not leave Balder forever within the realm of the dead. After the destruction, Balder returns in the renewed world. You see him standing where the smoke has lifted, quiet and unharmed beneath a clearer sky. Hertha, who was involved in Balder's death, is also named among those who return after Ragnarök. The two names remain connected beyond the violence that once divided them. Their return does not erase what happened, and the renewed world is not a place where memory has been washed clean. Instead, the old sorrow becomes part of the meaning of what comes next. Balder and Hertha carry death and return together. The first light of the renewed world spreads across water that has become calm and transparent. Dew gathers upon the grass, catching the pale color of dawn without shining harshly. The ground feels cool beneath your feet, soft with rain and new growth. A faint wind moves through young stems, making a sound like silk drawn slowly across wood. No smoke reaches this place, though the horizon still carries a dim stain from the destroyed world. The smell of wet leaves rises around you, joined by the clean scent of exposed soil. A bird calls from beyond a low hill, then answers itself from farther away. In the distance, a narrow river reflects the sky in broken silver. The air has lost the taste of ash, and each breath feels lighter than the one before. Balder's return is meaningful because Balder has died. If the renewed world merely restored the old divine order, the destruction would be an interruption without consequence. The return of Balder and Hertha instead suggests that renewal includes what the old world could not resolve. The new world is not simply Asgard rebuilt with its former inhabitants placed in their former seats. It is a changed place, carrying the memory of fire, loss, betrayal, and sacrifice. You walk beside the young river while the names of the dead settle into the past. Odin's fate has given Vidar his purpose. Fenrir's fall has followed from the wolf's long imprisonment. Thor's victory has ended with 9 steps and venom. The Midgard serpent, child of Loki and Angerbotha, has vanished beneath the sea. Freyr's earlier gift of the self-fighting sword has shaped his meeting with Surtr. Tyr and Garma have died together, and Heimdallr and Loki have done the same. Balder and Hertha stand beyond these endings, proof that death and return have never been entirely separate. The gods do not survive because they conquer fate. Some survive because their appointed work continues through them, and others return only after the old order has been broken. The meaning lies not in escaping the pattern, but in passing through it completely. Morning lies softly over the renewed fields, where young grass bends beneath droplets of water. The river makes a quiet line through the valley, carrying small leaves, pale petals, and grains of dark soil towards the sea. Sunlight reaches the ground in narrow bands between clouds, warming the stones one by one. A gentle breeze moves across your face, bringing the scent of birch bark and damp earth. The sound of wings rises from a distant grove, then fades into the rustle of branches. No weapon marks this part of the land. and no footprint remains from the armies that crossed Vigrid. A low mist rests over the water, glowing at its edges as the day strengthens. Beyond it, the hills appear newly formed, though their foundations belong to the world that burned. Balder and Hertha remain together within the quiet that follows destruction. Their presence does not make the former world return. Balder is not simply restored to his earlier place, and Hertha is not removed from the history of his action. They enter a world altered by the deaths of Odin, Thor, Freyja, to Heimdallr, Loki, Fenrir, the Midgard serpent, and Surtr. The new order grows from the remains of the old one, and its strength comes partly from what cannot be undone. You stand upon the bank and watch the light move over the water. The fate written at the beginning has reached its final line, yet the story does not become empty. Odin's death has made room for Vidhar's endurance. Thor's last steps have marked the distance between victory and mortality. Freyja's absent sword has shown how an earlier gift can remain present across generations. The paired deaths of Tyr and Garma, Heimdallr and Loki, have closed old conflicts without declaring one side untouched. Balder and Hertha, waiting beyond Ragnarök, hold the possibility that the world can remember without remaining trapped. The new world is not the old divine order restored. It is a world in which the old deaths have become foundations. The wind moves over the grass with a sound too soft to call a song. Sunlight rests upon the river, and the water carries the last traces of ash away from the valley. A raven passes high above you, its wings steady now, crossing a field without disturbance. No thunder follows it, and no silence needs to answer. The earth beneath your feet is firm, dark, and alive with roots beginning their slow work. Far beyond the hills, the sea turns beneath a clean sky, hiding the dead serpent in its depths. Somewhere among the new trees, Balder and Hertha walk beneath branches that have never known fire. The morning continues, patient and unhurried, while the world learns its new shape. And so the gods' deaths become part of the renewal. Odin, chief of the Aesir, is swallowed by Fenrir, and Vidar answers with the reinforced shoe that holds the wolf's lower jaw. Thor kills the Midgard serpent, walks 9 steps, and falls beneath its venom. Freyja faces Surtr without the sword he gave to Skirnir for Jörðr. Tyr and Garma die in their encounter, while Heimdallr and Loki destroy one another. Balder and Hertha return after Ragnarök, carrying the truth that ending and beginning may belong to the same design. You remain beside the river as the light grows stronger. The plain behind you has become distant, and the names of the dead rest within the earth, the sea, and the smoke-cleared air. Ahead, the renewed world opens without banners, horns, or the old certainty that power can preserve itself forever. Grass rises through the dark soil. Water finds its course. The first birds call from the trees. Beneath the quiet sky, death has completed its work, and return begins. The light grows stronger beside the river, while the renewed world opens quietly beyond the fields and wooded slopes. Ahead, the surviving land stretches beneath a sky washed with pale brightness, and no banner marks the place where ancient powers once gathered. Grass rises through dark soil, water finds its course, and the first birds call from branches softened by morning. Yet beyond this gentle beginning, another memory remains within the old songs, when the world passed through fire, darkness, and water. In that distant telling, you stand at the southern edge of the world, where the horizon has begun to tremble with red light. The heat arrives before the fire becomes visible, traveling across the plain in slow waves that touch your face and hands. Far away, the sea lies dull beneath a clouded sky, while thin smoke gathers above the hills and turns the air copper. There is no sudden thunder to announce the change, only a deepening warmth and a brightness moving steadily towards the north. The stones beneath your feet retain the night's cold, though the grass around them bends beneath a breath carrying wet ash. In the Ragnarök tradition, Surtr comes from the south as a fire giant, or as a fiery being shaped by the burning end. You see him advancing across the darkened world, carrying a bright sword whose radiance is associated with fire and the last great battle. His sword shines before him like a narrow sun, and its light runs over the slopes where the older order has begun to fail. Surtr is not described as a traveler seeking a settled kingdom, because his coming belongs to the breaking of every familiar boundary. The south becomes a direction of flame, and Surtr's name moves through the darkness as steadily as fire beneath the earth. His brightness passes over empty fields, stones, and dim water, leaving each surface briefly colored with red. Smoke turns the sky copper and black above you, folding the distant mountains into indistinct shapes without edges or height. The wind carries a dry taste at first, followed by the faint mineral scent of stone warming beneath a hidden heat. You hear no ordinary birdsong now, and the grasses whisper against one another beneath a sky where the old stars remain. The air grows heavy around your shoulders, though the fire itself has not yet reached the ground beside the river. Across the southern horizon, the moving brightness widens, and the darkness above it seems to draw back like a curtain. The final battle gathers around Surtr, and among its last struggles you see him meet Freyr, the god associated with peace, fertility, and fruitful seasons. Freyr has given away the weapon that might have served him, and the encounter carries the quiet sadness of an unequal contest. Surtr fights Freyr beneath the collapsing order of the world, where old loyalties and ancient protections no longer possess their former strength. The bright sword passes between them, and Freyr falls before the fiery being who has come from the south. No human witness records the exchange as a sequence of movements, and the sources leave the meeting solemn, spare, and immense. You remain at a distance from the combat, standing where the river bends away from the darkening fields and rising smoke. The earth feels warmer beneath your feet, while moisture gathers along the stones and glimmers without sunlight. A red reflection trembles on the river, breaking apart whenever the current passes over a shallow ridge. The smell of grass has faded, replaced by smoke, iron, and the damp odor of soil disturbed by unseen pressure. Above the water, ash drifts slowly downwards, settling on reeds and stones with a softness almost like winter snow. The battle between Surtr and Freyr marks no ordinary victory, because the fire that follows belongs to the whole world. In the Völuspá, Surtr's fire burns the world after the battle, spreading beyond the places where gods and giants have struggled. The flames cross the sky, and the familiar stars disappear from the heavens as darkness and brightness change places. You see fire above the land, not as one isolated blaze, but as a vast transformation of the world's visible order. The prose Edda describes sky and earth being set alight, joining the upper and lower realms within one burning scene. Landmarks lose their distance, and the distinction between mountain, cloud, field, and horizon becomes uncertain beneath the red glare. The stars vanish one by one behind smoke, until the heavens contain neither their old patterns nor the reassuring order of night. Heat arrives before every visible tongue of flame, pressing gently against your skin as though the air itself has become a warm stone. The sky above you changes from grey to bronze, then from bronze to blackness edged with burning color. Smoke gathers in long veils, and the copper light beneath it gives the river an unfamiliar, tarnished appearance. Every breath carries the taste of ash, while the distant fire makes the silence feel dense and almost physical. The grass lies flattened along the banks, and small pools between the stones reflect the sky without showing any stars. Far across the plain, flames move through the darkness with measured steadiness, consuming the old landscape without haste. The Völuspá's destruction imagery brings flame, smoke, darkness, and flood into the same vision, allowing no single element to explain the ending. You watch the burning sky lean over the land, while shadows deepen beneath the trees and the river becomes almost black. The old separation between heaven, earth, and sea begins to dissolve, not through one named catastrophe, but through gradual unmaking. The sources do not describe Ragnarök as one historical eruption or earthquake, and they offer no single physical event behind the poem. Some modern scholars have compared its volcanic imagery with Icelandic landscapes and eruptions, where fire, ash, darkness, and altered ground belong together. Those interpretations remain debated, and the old poetry does not reduce its vision to a particular mountain, island, or remembered day. Surtr's fire therefore remains larger than any one landscape, carrying a mythic force across sky, land, and water. Beneath the smoke, water begins to move over stones and grass, first in narrow channels and then across the low ground. You hear rushing water beneath the distant roar, each current carrying ash, broken reeds, and small fragments of darkened earth. The banks lose their shape slowly, as water covers roots and stones that have rested beside the river since before memory. There is no invented measure for the burning, because the surviving sources give no precise number of days for fire and submergence. Time becomes difficult to hold, and Surtr's bright sword seems to belong to an age measured by changes rather than clocks. The flood rises over the land as the old world passes away, entering hollows, fields, valleys, and places where houses once stood. The Midgard serpent's movements are associated with violent flooding, and its disturbance belongs to the same collapse of the world's boundaries. You feel the ground tremble beneath the water's pressure, though the old account does not require a single earthquake to explain the scene. The sea advances over stones and grass, lifting branches, covering paths, and smoothing marks left by generations of footsteps. Water rushes through the low country with a full, continuous sound, hiding smaller noises beneath its broad and patient movement. The surface carries leaves, dark wood, pale foam, and ash settled upon the waves before reaching the flooded shore. Cold water curls around the roots of the grass, and the warm air above becomes thick with smoke and moisture. The smell of wet ash follows the flames, settling over the drowned ground with a faint bitterness that clings to the air. Clouds gather low above the rising sea, and the last copper light fades beneath their heavy, darkened folds. In the Völuspá, fire and sea do not stand apart, because destruction arrives as a mingling of burning and drowning. Surtr's flame has crossed the world, while the waters now rise over it, covering the old order beneath a dark surface. The established arrangement of sky, land, and sea is temporarily dissolved, and no familiar boundary remains firmly in place. You see the horizon disappear beneath cloud and water, while the places of gods, giants, animals, and human beings become hidden. The sea functions as a destructive force here, carrying away the visible world and closing over its former dwellings. Yet the same sea will later become the medium from which the renewed earth rises, holding destruction and return within one image. Nothing in the surviving narrative suggests that the flood remains forever, although the passage through it is vast and complete. The water climbs over the final stones, and the world's surface becomes a dark, moving field beneath the clouded heavens. The sound of rushing water grows softer as distance disappears, until even the farthest movement seems enclosed within one broad murmur. Cold vapor drifts above the waves, turning sea and sky into a single grey region without a clear dividing line. The air no longer carries the scent of living plants, only salt, moisture, smoke, and the faint odor of newly drowned soil. Your hands feel cold despite the lingering warmth above, because the water has taken heat from stones and grasses. Ash rests upon the surface in scattered patches, opening and closing whenever the water shifts beneath it. For a while, the world contains neither its old brightness nor familiar darkness, but only clouds, water, and the memory of flame. After the final battle, The surviving narrative allows a pause in which the world is empty of its former inhabitants. You stand beside the drowned silence, where no familiar voice rises from the sea and no old road leads through the mist. The gods who shaped the former order have vanished from the scene, and the creatures bound to their conflict have disappeared with them. No household fire answers from a distant hill, and no footsteps disturb the wet stones beneath the low, colorless sky. The emptiness is not described as a place of punishment, but as a quiet interval after immense labor. You remain among the traces of what has passed, though even those traces gradually disappear beneath water and drifting cloud. The old world has not been replaced immediately, and the silence must remain for a while before another brightness can be recognized. Beneath the clouded sea, currents move over drowned land, passing through valleys that no longer possess names. Water rushes less violently now, sliding over submerged stones with a deep sound distant from the air. A long silence rests beneath the sea, where no bird calls, no branch moves, and no human word travels across the water. Above the surface, the clouds loosen at their edges, though the sky remains pale and without morning's warmth. The smell of wet ash lingers over the waves, mingling with salt and the clean, mineral scent of rain. Nothing rises yet, and the sea appears to possess the whole world beneath its broad, quiet covering. The pause after the flood becomes almost weightless, as if the world has set down every burden it once carried. In the dark interval after destruction, the sun herself has been destroyed, yet the surviving account preserves the possibility of light. You hear that the sun later bears a daughter who follows her mother's path after the original sun has vanished. The solar daughter continues across the heavens, carrying a successor's brightness into a world that might otherwise remain permanently dark. Her appearance does not undo the fire, because the old sun has truly passed, and the renewed light belongs to another generation. You picture her course above the quiet sea, small at first against the clouds, then widening into a gentle band of gold. The new light touches the water without restoring the old constellations, and the stars remain absent from the morning sky. A pale warmth gathers across the surface, revealing slow ripples, floating ash, and faint outlines of submerged ridges. The cloud cover becomes silver along its lower edges, while the sea below holds the color like a darkened mirror. There is no sharp sunrise, only a gradual thinning of darkness through which the first successor to the sun begins her path. The air smells of rain and wet stone, with the last traces of smoke fading into the open distance. Light rests upon the waves in broken lines, and each line disappears beneath a passing fold of water. The silence beneath the sea continues, though it no longer feels entirely empty, because brightness has returned above it. The destruction is total in scale, but not absolute in duration, and that distinction rests quietly within the surviving story. You remain near the water while the old world lies hidden, knowing only through the poem that its ending will not be final. The sea has covered the land, yet it has not erased the possibility that the land may rise again. Fire has passed over the world, and the silence after fire creates space where another order can slowly take form. No precise number of days measures this transition, and no surviving verse tells you exactly how long the darkness remains. The tale moves from burning to submergence, from submergence to stillness, and from stillness towards a world of altered light. Surtr's bright sword belongs to the ending, while the sun's daughter belongs to the quiet continuation beyond it. The old conflict has exhausted itself, leaving no remaining battle to disturb the waters or summon another wave. The sea grows calmer around you, and the broad surface begins to reflect the pale brightness of the returning sun. Small waves pass over hidden ground, their sound gentler now, like breath moving through a sleeping house. The air cools as smoke withdraws, and the heat that arrived before the fire becomes only a memory on your skin. Wet ash gathers in dark ribbons along the water, while clear drops fall from low clouds and break its surface. A faint scent of green things comes from somewhere beyond the horizon, though no shore can yet be seen. The sea remains immense and dark, but its darkness is softened by gold spreading slowly beneath the cloud. In the surviving narrative, the renewed earth rises from the water, carrying the promise of fields, trees, and quieter life. You wait beside the sea as a narrow ridge appears through the mist, first as shadow, then as solid earth. Water slips from its slopes, revealing grass that has survived beneath the covering, dark and bright with moisture. The new land rises without banners or horns, and no voice of former conflict claims it as a kingdom. What returns is not the old world restored exactly, but a gentler landscape prepared by fire, water, and silence. You see green spreading over the earth, and the color seems almost unfamiliar after the passage through copper light and black smoke. The sea withdraws slowly from stones and grass, leaving shining lines where its covering reached across the land. Rivulets descend from emerging slopes, joining pools that reflect the young sunlight carried by the sun's daughter. The smell of wet ash remains in the soil, yet beneath it lies the fresher scent of moss, roots, and rain. Water moves over stones and grass with a softer rhythm, no longer carrying the whole world towards darkness. Clouds open above the returning ground, and a clear brightness rests upon the quiet surface without burning it. The first green shoots bend beneath the breeze, while drops of water tremble along their narrow leaves. No familiar road is visible, though the land offers broad spaces where paths may later form through unhurried movement. The sea, which destroyed the old order, now leaves behind the damp foundation of a world less burdened by ancient quarrels. You stand at the edge of the renewed earth, listening as water retreats and the first distant birds begin to call. Their voices are small against the sea, yet they cross the open air without meeting any answering cry from the old world. The sun's daughter follows her path above you, and her light settles across the fields with calm unfamiliarity. Surtr's fire has become ash, the stars have returned to the future sky, and the drowned land has begun to breathe again. Nothing suggests that the old battles will simply resume, because the landscape itself has been changed by their passing. The sea remains beyond the grass, carrying the memory of darkness while reflecting the brightness that now moves above it. You feel the cool air upon your face, and beneath the quiet ground, water continues its slow journey towards the shore. A few stones shine beside the river, washed clean where ancient fire and later flood have passed together. Grass grows between them, tender and green, drawing nourishment from soil that has held both ash and rain. The renewed world is quieter, greener, and less burdened by the old conflict, though its peace remains deep rather than triumphant. You remain beside the river as the light grows stronger, while the sea withdraws towards its distant boundary. Beneath the quiet sky, death has completed its work, and return begins within damp earth and moving water. Fire and sea have not ended the world forever, but have prepared it for slower life beyond the memory of battle. Far below the brightening surface, the last darkness gathers in hollows, while green roots begin their patient descent. The old world rests beneath the water, and the water itself has become a covering rather than a final destination. Along the riverbank, the stones hold the morning's coolness, and the grass carries small beads of clear rain. A faint breeze moves from the sea, bringing salt, wet ash, and the delicate scent of plants opening beneath new light. The first birds call again from the trees, and their voices pass over fields where no ancient banner remains. Above them, the daughter of the sun follows her mother's path, preventing the renewed world from remaining permanently dark. The land rises quietly from the sea, and the silence beneath the water becomes the hidden foundation of what returns. You stand at the edge of the new shore, where green earth has lifted itself beyond the reach of the waves. No trumpet announces the change, and no surviving hand raises a banner above the quiet fields. Sunlight spreads across wet green earth, touching stones, pools, and the first slender stems of grass. The shore carries the cool scent of salt, rain, and soil newly opened to the air. Far away, birds call across an empty strand, their voices thin but steady beneath the broad morning sky. Beneath your feet, the ground feels soft, dark, and yielding, as though the world has only just remembered how to hold a living step. In the Völuspá and the Prose Edda, the earth rises again after Ragnarök, emerging from the sea as a renewed country. The land is green and fertile, and its abundance is expressed through growing grain and restored natural life. What has vanished is not replaced by another crowded age of towers, roads, and halls, but by a quieter beginning. The new earth does not arrive as a finished kingdom, already ordered in every detail. It appears as soil, grass, water, and open space, ready to receive the first traces of life. Around you, young grain bends beneath a mild wind, and each blade catches the light with a small silver brightness. The world has survived through its simplest forms, and those forms are enough to begin again. You walk beside the water, following a narrow rise where the tide has left pale shells and fragments of blackened wood. No old road leads inland, and no familiar path crosses the hills. The former settlements have disappeared beneath flood, fire, and the long movement of the earth. Their outlines may remain in buried stones, yet no wall stands high enough to guide you. A distant call of birds travels from beyond a low meadow, and the empty shore seems to listen. With every step, soft grass folds under your feet and springs slowly upright again. The ground is unfamiliar, but it is not hostile. Its silence contains no threat, only the patient spaciousness of a world without witnesses. Within Hodmamis Holt, Lif and Lifthrasir have endured the destruction. Their names are commonly understood as Life and Leifjörna, or as expressions closely related to those meanings, and their survival carries a fitting weight. During the burning and breaking of the old world, they lived on morning dew. Hidden from the violence outside, they received nourishment from the smallest measure of freshness available to them. The sources do not identify Hodmamis Holt with one certain historical forest, and its exact earthly location remains beyond recovery. It may be imagined as a wooded refuge, deep enough to shelter two human beings while the world around them was consumed. When they emerge, their first road has no direction except away from darkness. The shelter stands among trees whose trunks are darkened by smoke, while small leaves have already begun to gather in the upper branches. You see Lif and Lifthrasir step into the open air, their movements careful after the long confinement. Their clothing is worn, and their faces carry the pallor of people who have known the world only through distant thunder. Morning dew rests upon the grass around them, echoing the drops that once sustained them in hiding. A mild wind passes between the trunks, carrying the clean smell of wet bark and new plants. Beyond the trees, the land extends towards low hills, where sunlight lies upon the slopes in broad, unbroken sheets. Nothing calls them by name, yet the earth receives their feet. Lif and Lifthrasir become the ancestors of renewed human life, carrying human continuity beyond the end of the former age. Their story is not presented as the restoration of every lost person, nor as the reopening of every ancient household. Two remain, and from their hidden endurance, a new human community may eventually descend. In this small number, the myth keeps its attention upon persistence rather than abundance. Human life begins again because two people were sheltered, because dew remained, and because the earth could still offer them a place. The green world is quieter than the old one, but it is not empty or lifeless. It waits for speech, labor, affection, and the slow making of ordinary days. The meadow opens before you, shining with dew beneath the rising sun. Each bead of water rests on a blade of grass, and the low plants seem covered with clear glass. Young grain moves in long, gentle ripples, responding to the mild wind that crosses the open ground. Along the far bank, Water gathers in shallow channels left by the retreating sea. The air is cool against your face, though warmth is beginning to collect on the dark soil. Somewhere beyond the meadow, a bird answers another from a line of trees. Their calls are separated by wide distances, yet together they form a living thread across the silence. Soft footsteps among the grass mark the first human passage through a country that has forgotten all previous roads. The surviving gods also find one another in the grass where the former settlements once stood. They do not return to the old halls, because those halls have been swept away with the order that sustained them. Vidar survives Ragnarök after killing Fenrir, and Vali remains alive beside him. Thor's sons, Mothi and Magni, endure the catastrophe and inherit Mjolnir, their father's hammer. The hammer has passed into younger hands, not as a simple repetition of the past, but as a sign that responsibility has crossed the boundary of one generation. Around you, the surviving gods gather without the splendor of their former courts. They carry memory, loss, and the knowledge that victory cannot restore what has been destroyed. Grass grows over the places where familiar settlements once stood. You see no carved doorway, no roof beam, and no fire burning beneath a familiar hearthstone. A few stones lie half buried beneath the green, their surfaces softened by rain and salt. The gods move among them with measured steps, and the sound of their passage is almost lost beneath the grasses. Mothi and Magni bear Mjolnir between them, its shape dark against the morning brightness. Vidar stands near the edge of the field, silent beneath the open sky, while Vali looks towards the hills. The air carries the scent of crushed stems and wet earth. Memory is present everywhere, though nothing speaks it aloud. The renewed gods meet in a world where the old divine order has been transformed. They are not simply restored to their former positions, and the sources do not describe an untouched heaven returning above an unchanged earth. Balder returns from hell after the old world's destruction, and Hertha is also named among those who return in the renewed world. Their presence gathers together a wound that shaped the earlier age, though the myth does not offer a long account of their reunion. Balder, once associated with brightness and beauty, stands again beneath the new sun. Hertha, whose blindness and hand were bound to the tragedy of the old world, shares the renewed ground. Their return is quiet, almost restrained, and therefore deeply strange. The sunlight strengthens as it moves across the shore, revealing pale sand beneath the retreating water. Small pools reflect the sky, and each pool trembles when the wind passes over its surface. The sea has become calmer, though dark fragments still drift beyond the shallows. Inland, fresh grass rises around stones marked by fire. The texture of the ground changes beneath your feet, from smooth mud to soft moss, and then to the tender roughness of newly growing plants. Birds continue their distant calling, sometimes hidden beyond the rise. The morning has no sharp boundary between ruin and renewal. Ash remains beneath the green, and green life grows directly through it. The sun's daughter takes the sun's path after the original sun has been swallowed or destroyed. Her journey preserves the rhythm of daylight, allowing the renewed earth to receive warmth and color. The sources speak of her following the course once held by the older sun, and this inheritance gives the sky a continuity that the land itself has lost. You watch the light move over the fields, first touching the tops of the grain, and then spreading down across the dark ground. Without this returning passage, the green earth would remain beautiful but cold, held beneath a permanent shadow. Instead, morning follows morning. The sun's daughter carries a familiar fire into a changed age, and the world begins to measure time again. Near the water, sunlight spreads over the wet earth in slow bands of gold. The surface dries in patches, leaving a darker outline where the tide has withdrawn. Fresh grass shines with dew beside the pools, while young grain bends and rises in the passing breeze. The air smells of rainwater, salt, and crushed green stems. Across the empty shore, a bird calls once, and the sound is answered from a distant stand of trees. No great noise accompanies the daughter of the sun. Her path is visible only in the gradual warmth of stones, the opening of leaves, and the soft brightness settling upon the fields. The sky becomes a place of movement again, though its movement is gentle. Baldur's return gives the renewed world a figure who belongs to both grief and brightness. He has crossed through hell, and his presence recalls the former order without restoring it completely. Hertha returns as well, and beside Baldur he stands within a world that no longer repeats the circumstances of their earlier sorrow. The myth does not pause to explain every feeling between them. It lets their names remain together in the new country, where the past has become part of the ground beneath the grass. You see them walking near the water, their shadows lengthening behind them. Their return suggests that renewal may include reconciliation, although the old pain is not erased. What survives is not innocence, but life carrying memory with greater patience. Vidar remains among the gods because he faced Fenrir at the end and brought the wolf's destruction to its close. Vali also survives, and both figures enter the renewed world with the weight of their former deeds behind them. Mothi and Magni inherit Mjolnir, and the hammer's presence links the new generation with Thor, whose strength could not carry him beyond Ragnarök. They hold the weapon as an inheritance, but no battle waits immediately before them. The old need for constant defense has passed into a quieter responsibility. They must inhabit the land, protect what grows, and help shape a divine community without the familiar hierarchy of the former world. Their future is open, and its openness feels almost like rest. Beyond the meadow, a narrow stream moves over stones polished by the flood. You hear its sound before seeing it, a soft and continuous murmur beneath the birds. Reeds lean along the bank, their pale stems trembling whenever the wind reaches them. The water carries small leaves towards the sea, though no hand has planted the trees upstream. Light breaks across the current in fragments, and the moving reflections resemble scattered pieces of sky. Where the old settlements once stood, grass has covered the hard places and softened the edges of buried foundations. The world is not silent, but its sounds are modest. Water, wing, wind, and footfall become the first music of the renewed earth. The Völuspá also mentions a powerful figure who comes from above after the renewal. The meaning of this passage is debated, and the sources do not settle the question for later readers. Some interpret the figure through Christian influence, seeing a connection with ideas that entered Icelandic literary culture after the conversion. Others argue for an internal Norse meaning, perhaps connected with a powerful being or divine presence within the myth's older imaginative structure. No interpretation can be stated with complete certainty. You stand beneath the open sky, while the figure remains partly veiled by the poem's language. The renewed earth is therefore not a simple picture with every symbol explained. Its brightness contains a remaining shadow of uncertainty. A light cloud passes above the fields, softening the sun without hiding it. The young grain becomes a muted green, then brightens again when the cloud moves onward. Dew lingers in the hollows, where the ground stays cool and dark. Along the shore, the water lifts and lowers with a slow rhythm, carrying a faint line of foam. The scent of grass is strongest near the stream, mixed with the mineral smell of wet stones. A bird flies low over the meadow and disappears beyond the trees. Nothing in the landscape demands a final explanation. The land gives itself through color, texture, and movement, while the sky keeps its old habit of changing. The sources do not describe a simple doctrine of reincarnation, nor do they promise a guaranteed cycle repeating endlessly without alteration. Ragnarök is followed by renewal, but the renewed world is not presented as the old world starting again in identical form. Some beings return, others do not, and certain relationships continue under changed conditions. The earth rises, the sun's daughter follows the inherited path, and human life begins through Lif and Lifthrasia. These details create continuity, yet they also preserve rupture. You walk through a world where the future has roots in the past, without being bound to reproduce every former shape. The myth holds renewal and loss together, leaving neither one to cancel the other. The stream widens before reaching the sea, forming a shallow pool bordered by moss and flattened reeds. Sunlight rests upon the water, and small insects move above its surface in brief, wavering patterns. A mild wind travels through the young grain beyond the bank, making the field sound like a distant whisper. The grass beneath you is cool, with a springy texture where roots have begun to knit the soil together. Far along the coast, birds call over the empty shore, their notes carried inland by the air. The smell of wet green earth rises whenever your step presses into the ground. Even the smallest place seems inhabited by the promise of further growth. The story's ending places emphasis on continuity through sunlight, crops, human life, memory, and a small surviving divine community. Nothing suggests that abundance must first become magnificent before it becomes meaningful. A crop beginning in the soil may be enough, and a human pair leaving a shelter may be enough. The gods gathering in grass may be enough to preserve a thread between the former age and the next. Around you, the first grain leans towards the sun's daughter, who continues the path of the lost sun. The green earth does not celebrate loudly. It remains, it warms, it feeds, and it offers room for another generation to place its feet. A soft brightness lies along the shore, where the tide has drawn shining lines across the sand. The new grass is finer near the water and thicker farther inland, where dark soil holds the morning damp. Tiny beads of dew cling beneath the leaves, protected from the sun for a little longer. The wind moves through the grain with a sound that rises and fades without forming a pattern. Above the distant trees, birds cross the pale sky in a loose, uneven line. Their shadows pass over the field and vanish before you can follow them. The air has lost the bitterness of smoke, though a faint mineral trace remains in the stones. Lif and Lifthrasia now stand beyond the trees, looking towards the fields that will sustain their descendants. Their names remain small words against the vastness of the renewed landscape, yet those words hold the direction of the myth. Life has survived, and Life Yearner has continued to desire existence through the long night. They have no crowded city waiting for them, no inherited storehouse, and no familiar community to receive them. Their work begins with discovering water, gathering food, tending fire, and learning the new shapes of the land. From such ordinary acts, renewed human life may spread. Catastrophe has ended, but endurance has become a daily practice. The ground near the trees is soft with fallen leaves, and your feet make almost no sound as you cross it. Some trunks bear scars where heat passed through the forest, while others carry small green shoots along their lower branches. The shelter behind you remains dark, holding the last coolness of the night. Before you, the meadow opens beneath a widening sky. Dew brightens the grass, and the air tastes clean enough to seem newly made. A bird calls from within the woodland, followed by another farther away. The sea breathes against the shore behind you, while the inland stream continues towards it. Water joins water, and the land gathers both into its patient renewal. The surviving gods move through the meadow, carrying knowledge of what was lost. Balder and Hertha belong to the renewed company, while Vidar and Vali stand among those who endured the final violence. Mothi and Magni keep Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, as a sign of inheritance rather than a promise that every former battle will return. Their gathering does not recreate Asgard, and no restored court appears above the grass. The old divine order has been transformed into something smaller and less secure. You see them sharing the open country with the first human survivors, joined by the need to protect what remains. Power has become stewardship, and memory has become a form of shelter. The meadow is warm now where the sun has reached it, while the hollows retain a coolness from the night. Grass bends around the ankles, leaving a faint wetness upon the skin. The grain gives off a dry, green fragrance whenever the wind passes through its stems. On the shore, water glitters between dark bands of sand, and a distant bird calls from beyond the low dunes. Soft footsteps travel across the field, sometimes human, sometimes belonging to no creature you can see. The open space once held walls and roofs, though no trace of their height remains. Beneath the living green, the old world rests quietly, becoming part of the soil. The renewed world can be read as a meditation on courage, mortality, and the persistence of order after catastrophe. Courage appears in the endurance of Lif and Lifthrasia, who remain alive through hunger, darkness, and the destruction of everything familiar. Mortality appears in the absence of those who do not return, even when the earth itself rises again. Order persists through the returning light, the growth of grain, the continuation of human descent, and the gathering of surviving gods. You stand within this balance, where no single answer removes the weight of the others. The future is not guaranteed to be easy, but it is given a beginning. The beginning is enough to carry the story beyond ruin. A narrow path forms where the grass has been pressed by repeated movement. It curves from the woodland towards the stream, though no one can say whether Lif and Lifthrasia made it, or whether animals first opened the way. Along its edges, dew remains bright beneath the leaves. Sunlight lies in broken patches, separated by the shadows of young branches. A mild breeze moves over the grain, and the field answers with a low, even rustle. From the coast comes the distant call of birds, softened by the breadth of the shore. The path is not old, yet it already carries the suggestion of habit. Repeated living begins to give form to the earth. Because the surviving evidence is literary and late, the exact meaning Ragnarök held for individual Viking Age communities cannot be recovered with certainty. The poems and prose preserve powerful images, but they do not provide a complete record of every belief held in every settlement. A farmer in Norway, a sailor in Iceland, and a household near the Danish Straits may have heard the story through different traditions and given its ending different shades of meaning. You cannot enter those lost minds with complete confidence. What can be seen is the shape left by the surviving texts: destruction followed by green land, returning sunlight, protected humanity, remembered gods, and an uncertain figure descending from above. The silence around the evidence is part of the inheritance. The shore is almost still, apart from the low movement of the tide. Wet sand reflects the pale blue of the morning, while small pools hold the brighter color of the sun. Grass shines along the upper bank, and its scent rises with the warmth. The wind has softened, passing through the grain like a hand across fine cloth. A bird calls beyond the dunes, and another answers from inland. Beneath the surface of the stream, rounded stones show through clear water. Each sound remains separate, yet together they make the landscape feel awake. The new earth does not need crowds to prove that life has returned. A few voices, a little water, and green growth are sufficient. You watch Lif and Lifthrasia move towards the stream, where they kneel and gather water in their hands. They drink slowly, looking across the meadow, as though measuring what kind of life the land may permit. Nearby, the surviving gods speak among themselves, though their words do not carry across the distance. Balder stands in the sunlight, and Hertha rests one hand upon a staff cut from a young tree. Vidar watches the hills, while Vali walks beside Mothi and Magni. Mjolnir lies wrapped in cloth between the brothers, ready to be carried into a future that has no old battlefield waiting beneath it. The scene contains no triumph. It contains recognition, labor, and the first quiet arrangement of a community. At the edge of the stream, young plants grow between flat stones, their leaves still tender and pale. Water slips around their roots, bringing silt from the inland slopes. A cool current touches your fingers when you lean towards it, and the dampness remains after you draw your hand away. The grass nearby is thick enough to soften every step. Light moves across the pool as the breeze changes direction, making the surface appear to breathe. Beyond the water, grain continues to bend in slow waves. The distant sea is visible between low ridges, bright beneath the sky. Everything seems connected by movement, though nothing moves with haste. The myth does not say that every grief has vanished from the renewed earth. Balder returns, but the old tragedy remains part of the knowledge carried by the gods. Hertha returns, but no simple explanation dissolves the sorrow surrounding his name. Vidar survives, yet survival follows an act of terrible violence against Fenrir. Vali remains, and Mothi and Magni inherit Thor's hammer, but inheritance itself reminds the new world of those who are absent. Lif and Lifthra are alive, while countless other human beings do not. Renewal, therefore, does not require forgetting. You can feel the past beneath the quiet surface, as ash lies beneath grass and drowned stones remain beneath clear water. A faint mist lifts from the stream and dissolves above the reeds. The morning air grows milder, carrying the scent of green leaves and damp soil towards the shore. Dew fades from the upper blades, though shaded grass remains bright with moisture. The grain is taller now in the warmer light, and its movement shows the direction of the breeze. A bird passes over the meadow, its wings briefly dark against the sun. Near the old foundations, flowers open among the stones, their colors small but distinct. The world has no need to hurry towards fullness. Each plant occupies its own moment, and the field becomes abundant through countless quiet beginnings. In this ending, order persists through relationships rather than through monuments. The sun's daughter preserves the course of daylight, and the crops preserve the possibility of nourishment. Lif and Lifthra preserve human descent, while the surviving gods preserve memory and shared responsibility. The renewed earth is green because life has not been reduced to a single form. Grain, birds, water, trees, humans, and gods occupy a common landscape. You walk among them without hearing the old distinctions proclaimed. No wall separates sacred ground from ordinary soil. The gods meet in grass, and humans begin beside a stream. The world after Ragnarök is therefore not empty space after an ending. It is a place where many modest continuities can gather. Clouds drift beyond the hills, leaving the nearer sky clear. Their shadows move across the distant slopes and pass over the fields without darkening them for long. The stream carries a few petals towards the sea, turning them gently in its current. Grass brushes against your ankles, cool where the shade remains and warm where the sunlight has settled. The air holds the faint sweetness of flowering plants, mingled with the clean sharpness of water. From the empty shore, birds call at irregular intervals. Their voices do not form a song arranged for an audience. They simply travel through the open air, announcing that the morning belongs to more than silence. The powerful figure mentioned in the Völuspá remains above the renewed world, surrounded by interpretation and uncertainty. The passage may reflect Christian influence, especially because the poem was recorded in a Christianized Icelandic environment. It may also preserve an internal Norse image, whose meaning was not dependent upon Christian teaching. The evidence does not allow the question to be closed with certainty. You see the sky extending over the green land, and the figure remains part of that height without becoming the sole explanation for what follows. The earth rises through its own mythic movement, the sun's daughter continues her path, and human life waits within the shelter of the forest. The ending remains open at its highest point. The water near the shore has become clear enough to reveal pale stones beneath the surface. Small currents pass between them, carrying threads of foam that break apart and vanish. On the upper bank, grass bends under a gentle wind, its tips still holding a few bright drops. The sun warms your face and the backs of your hands, while the air remains cool in the shade of the trees. A distant bird calls over the sea, and its sound returns faintly from the land. Nothing is polished or complete. The earth bears scars, the trees carry ash, and the fields are young. Yet the landscape has begun to make itself generous. The first acts of renewal are small enough to overlook. Lif and Lifthrasia drink from the stream, gather food, and learn where shelter may be found beneath the returning sun. The gods walk across the grass, naming one another and recalling those who are gone. Mothi and Magni carry Mjolnir into a world where the hammer's meaning must be discovered anew. Balder and Hertha stand within the same light, while Vidar and Vali keep watch over the open land. Grain bends, water moves, and birds cross the shore. Nothing declares that history has ended. Instead, history becomes possible again through repeated choices to remain, to tend, and to remember. Warmth settles into the soil, and the scent of earth rises wherever the grass has been pressed. The stream murmurs beneath the reeds, steady and low. Sunlight moves across the field until the remaining patches of dew disappear. Beyond the meadow, young trees stir together, their leaves making a soft sound like distant rain. A bird calls from the upper branches and then falls quiet. The sea continues its patient motion, touching the shore and retreating without leaving a mark that lasts long. Under the open sky, the green land seems broad enough to contain both memory and silence. The world has not become perfect. It has become alive. The ending of Ragnarök therefore rests upon continuity rather than spectacle. Sunlight returns through the daughter of the sun, crops rise from the fertile earth, and human life continues through the two who survived in Hodmamis Holt. Balder, Hertha, Vidar, Vali, Mothi, and Magni form a smaller divine community within the transformed world. Their survival does not recreate the former age, and their gathering in the grass does not erase the catastrophe. It gives the renewed land witnesses, guardians, and memories. You remain beside the quiet water while the grain moves inland. The old order has ended, but order itself has not vanished. It has become quieter, closer to the ground, and more dependent upon care. Evening will eventually pass over this shore, though the sun's daughter will carry the light along the inherited path. The fields will darken, then brighten again, and the first human descendants of Lif and Lifthrasia will learn the rhythm of those changes. Footpaths will form where people walk, shelters will rise where branches once offered shade, and grain will be gathered from the soil. Memory will pass between generations, altered by distance, but not entirely lost. You can imagine the sound of soft footsteps among grass where the former world once stood. Renewal begins in such movements, water carried by hand, seeds placed beneath earth, and the quiet decision to continue living. The tide reaches the lower stones and withdraws, leaving them shining beneath the light. Fresh grass leans towards the sea, and small flowers remain open beside the stream. A mild wind crosses the young grain, creating a broad green motion that travels from hill to hill. Birds call over the empty shore, now less distant, as the morning settles into day. The air is clear, carrying salt, damp soil, and the faint sweetness of leaves. Beneath the grass, old foundations sleep without demanding restoration. Above them, the renewed earth holds its brightness. Water, sunlight, crops, memory, and human life move together into the future,